Green light?
Not yet. Hold on. And we are now on the air.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission 2022 version. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city's website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda, please do. It contains important information about our process tonight. First up is the minutes. Approval of the minutes for September 28th, 2021 meeting. Does anybody have corrections they'd like to note? Not seeing that anybody does. So that means I'll approve a motion to approve the notes as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of September 28th, 2021 as written.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second that motion.
We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, aye, or raise your hand. We've got all in a support. Great. The motion has been passed. Next, the approval of minutes from October 12th, 2021. We've got a little bit of a backlog. Anybody have corrections to note relative to the October 12th meeting minutes? I'm seeing none, so I will take a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from October 12th, 2021 as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All in favor, thank you. It's been passed. And then finally, we have October 21st. I'm sorry, not finally. October 21st, 2021. Any corrections from this group? Seeing none, I will then take a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 21st, 2021 as presented.
Motion and second, please.
Second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, aye, or raise your hand. All in favor, motion is passed. Thank you. Okay, now finally, October 26th, 2021. Any corrections noted from this group? Seeing none, I will take a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from October 26th, 2021 as presented.
It's been moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, aye. All in favor. Thank you very much, everybody. We made it through the meeting minutes approval. So let's then move on. Informational items. Staff, do we have any informational items tonight? None. Laura is signaling no. Great. Audience participation. Do we have an audience? We do. We have a good audience tonight. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on the agenda. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on the agenda this evening? If so, please use the raise your hand function in Zoom to indicate that you wish to make a comment. For any member on the phone, please use the *9 to raise your hand in Zoom and make a comment. So now I'll ask Vera if we have anybody waving their hand on Zoom or otherwise.
I don't see any hands being waved for this portion of the agenda.
Okay, we're going to move on then. This is now moving into the section of our agenda that's relatively new, Community Involvement Advisory Committee. At this point, the Planning Commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee, the CIAC. I now ask staff to provide any update to this group.
I just wanted to let everyone know that we have currently scheduled on March 31st as part of a reflection of the joint meeting with you all and the NDAs back in the fall to do a reintroduction of Land Use Planning 101 with the neighborhood associations, because there's a lot of new members out there. So we've got something on the calendar for March 31st, and we'll be sending out that information to all of the neighborhood associations. So hopefully we can get a lot of participation and clear up any questions and teach all the new folks about how we do land use planning in the city.
And Laura, have you sent a invite out to this group? It's not on my calendar. I'm going to make sure it is, but
no, I have not sent an invitation out to you all. If this group would like to be participate, I can absolutely send that to you. I haven't sent out a formal invitation to anybody, period. So we're just kind of getting the ball rolling on it. So I can add that to the agenda, send it out to you all. Okay.
For those who'd like to attend, yep.
Yep, sounds great.
Awesome.
May I ask a question, Chair of the CIAC? May I ask a question?
Yes.
Are we going to have bylaws or procedures or something like that in written form for this particular group?
The bylaws are actually covered in the Planning Commission bylaws. And so there is a category that talks about what the function of this group is incorporated into the Planning Commission bylaws. And I can send that back out to you all.
I think that would be good.
Okay.
Just as a reminder.
Yep.
And then I'm seeing Jacob. Commissioner Sherman also has his hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. Just kind of a question for staff. If there's any updates on last year, the state passed a law talking about public meetings when it's reasonably possible to have an online component. And I know that there was some mentions in the past about how the city might be complying with that. Are there any updates that could be shared with us?
Well, basically what it is the requirement became effective at the beginning of the year that there has to be an online component for all public meetings. And we've had that online component for quite some time. So in this case, we're already doing what is required by the state. So we are in compliance with that, and we'll continue to offer online opportunities for everyone.
Other questions or thoughts from the commission or from the CIAC? Has anybody recently attended a neighborhood meeting? Greg, anything of note?
I actually have attended all 7 through December, January. And so they are great groups, great organizations, lots of good conversations. So.
Awesome. Let's see. Well, we're going to keep going then. Let me ask anybody in the audience if you have a question for the CIAC, now would be the time. So just give you a moment here to either raise your hand or again, star 9. If you're on the phone, if you'd like to ask this group, Vera, are you frozen or did you give me a signal? Okay, sorry. Maybe it's my internet. Apologize. Okay,
you cut out a couple of times, but
did I?
You're back.
If that happens, I may have to adjust my video. Okay, let's keep going then. I'm going to move into our first hearing item. So tonight we are going to I would look at proposed construction of a manufacturing light industrial building at 9285 Southeast 58th Drive. The public hearing on the proposed construction of a manufacturing light industrial building and required variance at 9285 Southeast 58th Drive is called to order. The purpose of the hearing is to consider application number VR-2021-012. The purpose of the application is to request approval for the various applications associated with the construction of a manufacturing light industrial building at 9285 Southeast 58th Drive. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, any applicable municipal code provisions, and that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask that the staff cite the zoning ordinance section or sections where the criteria can be found.
Thank you, Chair Lesfeld. I'm happy to read those. And just as a point of information that the applicant has submitted in writing, a request that this hearing be continued to April 12th. So I'm happy to read the criteria. Sorry, hold on. The following provisions of the municipal code apply to this project. Municipal code section 12.16 access management, section 19.309 manufacturing zone, section 19.600 off-street parking and loading, section 19.700 public facility improvements, section 19.906 development review, and section 19.911 variances.
Great, thank you, Vera. So I think you'll give me a signal here, Vera, just where you'd like me to kind of stop my reading of our script. But I think I'll go through conduct of hearing, and then we will. No.
No.
Do you want me to stop now, or?
I don't have the script in front of me. My apologies, but I think at this point, we don't need to go through the remainder of the script, and I'll let the city attorney jump in if he needs to. But the applicant has submitted in writing a request for a continuation of the public hearing to April 12th, as well as, and they have submitted in writing a waiver of the 120-day clock, so that we can accommodate the appropriate review time for the public hearing as well.
With that being said, I'd like to make a motion to continue the hearing until the applicant is available.
Okay, I thank you for that, Greg.
Hold on, Vera wants to stop me.
If I may, sorry, Commissioner Hemer, the motion would be a continuation to a date certain, which is April 12th.
Oh, I'm sorry. Continue to a date certain of April 12th.
I have a motion.
Second.
Do I have a second? Okay, and I've got a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Aye. All right. It looks like all of us are in favor. It's been moved and seconded. We will continue this discussion at a later date. Okay. Justin, are you? I saw the lips move.
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay. Well, that's probably a good thing. Means we're doing our job correctly. Thanks, Justin. Okay, we'll move on then. Let me scroll. All right, so we are moving on then to Dogwood Station. The public hearing of Dogwood Station development and required variance at 2206 Southeast Washington Street is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number VR-2021-017. The purpose of this application is to request approval for the various applications associated with the proposed 6-story multi-unit development at 2206 Southeast Washington. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning and subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provisions, and that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections relevant
Chair Losfeld, I just wanted to interrupt before we get any further into this public hearing portion that we do have a hand raised in the attendees section. I think it was regarding the previous hearing item. So I just wanted to take a moment to clarify for the audience and for everybody that's here that hearing, we're not going to be discussing any of the information related to that hearing this evening, but we will be discussing that on April 12th. And so we invite you to come back, either to come back and testify at that time or to submit comments in writing at that time for the April 12th meeting. But tonight we're not discussing that. And it looks like the hand has gone down. I just wanted to take a second to clarify that. So please continue on. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. So now I'll ask staff, please cite the zoning ordinance sections.
Happy to. Okay. Milwaukie Municipal Code, Section 19.304, Downtown Mixed Use Zone. Section 19.505.3, Multifamily Housing. Section 19.510, Green Building Standards. Section 19.605, Vehicle Parking Requirements. Section 19.609, Bicycle Parking. Section 19.700, Public Improvements. Section 19.907, Downtown Design Review. Section 19.911.6, Building Height Variance in Downtown Mixed Use Zone. Section 19.1006, Type 3 Review. And Section 19.1011, Design Review Meetings.
All right. Thank you, Vera. All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address the criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or otherwise other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons withstanding are those who have submitted written comments or testify in person via Zoom. Conduct of hearing. If you are here to testify, please remember, confine your remarks to the application and relevant criteria, and to avoid repetition not relevant to this conversation. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. Let's talk through conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Please raise your hand. Okay. I'm seeing none. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? Okay. Let's start with Commissioner Ernst.
I think this is the part where I say I may or may not have had conversations in our community online group, because there's thousands and thousands of posts and conversations and tags. I don't remember specifically anything that would impact any, I think, decisions or votes I would have tonight, but I may or may not have discussed some of this or anything. I need to just come up with a standard, because that's pretty much the standard almost every time. So
I think that would be a great idea, Commissioner Ernst. Yeah, you'll feel better, and I think staff can help do that.
Thank you.
No, I think that's a good idea, because it's should be represented at each conversation. Commissioner Hamer. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, if I do remember like a specific or, then I would mention it, but there's just a standard probably discussed at some point, or may have discussed. So.
Right. Agreed. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Hamer.
As I said before, I attended all 7 NDAs, and I can't remember if it was December or January, but Historic did have this presentation put forth before them. And so I listened to the presentation because I was interested, but I did leave the meeting before Historic had the discussion.
Okay. Others? Okay, appreciate that. We're going to keep moving then. Does anyone have a rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by the commission? Vera, I'm sure you'll let me know if someone does raise their hand or any comment here.
No hands are raised.
Thank you. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise your hand? Okay, I'm seeing everybody has raised their hand. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. And did any of the commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone or at the site or know anything different than what's indicated in the staff report for this application? Please raise your hand. Seeing a lot of heads shaking no. Thank you. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of a member of the Planning Commission? Please, again, use the raise your hand function in Zoom or *9. Vera? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Thanks, everybody. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter?
No hands are raised.
Great. Staff report presentation. Let's proceed.
Okay. All right. Share my screen. Can everyone see the presentation? Is that working?
Yes.
Great.
Thank
you. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. Vera Coley, senior planner, here to present the staff report for this application. Okay. And it doesn't want to. Yeah, it's for me. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let me stop sharing really quick. Sorry. It was not advancing for some reason. Let's try that again. Okay. May have gotten ahead of myself. Okay, there we go. Okay. The subject property of the site is located at 2206 Southeast Washington Street. It's approximately 0.23 acres, around just over 10,000 square feet in size. And it's currently developed with a 2-story single unit home that's outlined here in red on the map. The property is surrounded by commercial development to the north, south, and east, and the orange line rail line tracks are to the west, directly to the west. Site is at the eastern edge of Milwaukee's downtown area, the downtown mixed-use zone, with the R1B zone directly to the east. The proposal that you can see here is to construct a 6-story residential building with 55 workforce-priced dwelling units. So it's a completely residential development. The units are proposed to be a mix of 1- and 2-bedroom units priced at 80% median family income, and that's contingent upon securing subsidies. I'm not going to get into the details of that. I'll let the applicant take care of that. The building would include shared amenity spaces, a common outdoor area, and a central courtyard, and integrated stormwater planters as described in the application materials. Top floor includes a rooftop deck that you can see there. The proposed building is pursuing Earth Advantage or LEED green building certification. And a parking quantity modification is proposed as part of the development package to allow the development with no off-street parking on the site, but rather to allow 43 parking spaces on 2 other downtown properties that would be available for lease to the tenants. A variance is requested to the building height limitation to allow an extra story. So it's a 6-story building where the maximum is 5 stories, but the measured height is under the maximum 69 feet of building height. So it's the additional story that triggers the height variance. Again, the building complies with the maximum building height. Again, it's at just under 65 feet. The maximum measured height is 69 feet in the DMU, but that additional story is what gets us into the building height variance. Okay. Again, for the application components, we have a variance request for the building height We have a parking quantity modification application, and that's related to the no on-site parking, but to allow parking spaces to be available for the tenants off-site. There is a downtown design review component and a transportation facilities review component that was part of the engineering package for the development. Downtown design review for the building is really per the multifamily design review in 19.508. So we are reviewing the project against the downtown design standards because the building has been designed against the multifamily design guidelines in 19.505.3. So the key questions that staff identified within the staff report are the following. Do the building's design and overall project's public benefits warrant the granting of the requested height variance, again, for the 6 stories that they're asking for? And is the requested modification to the required parking quantity justifiable? And it's not really the parking quantity, it's the location of the parking that they are proposing to provide as part of the development. So what we see here are the approval criteria for the building height variance in the downtown zone. Again, it's consistency with the applicable downtown design guidelines, talks about exceptional quality in the design of the building, preserving important views to the Willamette River, and that the project provides public benefits and or amenities beyond those that are required by the base zone standards. As a standalone residential building, and that the review is solely about the requested additional story in height, the applicable guidelines to the height variance are certain aspects of the Milwaukie character and pedestrian emphasis guidelines in the downtown design guidelines documents. So against the criteria for the building height variance. So the proposed building would be approximately 65 feet tall, which does comply with the measured maximum building height of 69 feet in the downtown mixed-use zone. However, as I mentioned, it's proposed to have 6 stories rather than 5. That allows for the development to have 9 additional residential units, dwelling units, as well as that rooftop deck that you can see in this drawing. The site is nearby or adjacent to a variety of building scales, styles, and sizes, including the Axle Tree development, which is just across the tracks here at Washington and 21st. The design is appropriate for a location close to the new high school, the Axle Tree development, and then the recently approved Coho Point development as well. It is designed to orient views towards downtown and the Willamette River, and again includes that rooftop deck to align the views for the building's residents towards the river into downtown. As designed and as described in the application materials, 80% of the units have direct views into that central courtyard, and all units have windows on at least 2 sides, which provides a lot of natural light into all of the units. The U-shaped design reduces the overall massing of the building form. So it's not a full sort of block of a building. It's the U-shape. So it breaks up the overall massing of the building to create that interior courtyard for access to all of those units. The building is set back from the rail line and it steps down at the southwest corner to provide that transition to some of the lower commercial buildings that are adjacent. And then as described in the application materials, to further break down the scale of the building, including the street-facing facade, all of the facades are broken into rhythms with materials. So depending on if your sort of that first floor has that, or that ground floor has that storefront window facade, then there is that publicly accessible terraced space that you see there adjacent to the rail line there. That's accessible by the public from the sidewalk. And then there's a material change from the interior of the courtyard at the entrance to all of the residential units as well. They are proposing to use vertical flashing breaks in the material as well as the jogged parapet heights at the top, on the top floor of the building. The project includes a 5-foot dedication along the north, as well as an open terrace, again, directly accessible off of Washington Street. So the main entries are set back 3 feet from that right of way so that there is protection from the weather as far as those entrances. The additional story and height allow the building's program to be dispersed more vertically throughout the building and allows for more opportunities for open space and pedestrian interaction at the ground floor and at the public right of way. The additional height and story provides the project a way to maintain the 4:1 FAR in the downtown mixed use zone, and again applies that program to that U-shaped footprint, which is different from a typical sort of block of a building. Again, all the facades have those jog parapet heights, and at the ground level, the recessed entries and overhangs align with those parapet jogs and those vertical breaks in the building's facades. Okay. And as far as the public benefits for the project, again, this project is proposed to be affordable housing development, and it also provides another component to the downtown revitalization effort that we've been working on over the last several years. Okay. The Design and Landmarks Committee, as required, had held a public review meeting on the project and submitted recommendations to the Planning Commission. Their overall recommendation was to approve the height variance for the building. They did provide some recommendations for the applicant as part of their presentation to you, and let the applicant speak to those. But their recommendation was to provide a view study to just kind of and a context study to kind of confirm, this building's place within its surroundings there in the downtown, to provide some information on the materials that are being proposed to be used for the building, and also some recommendations about breaking up the vertical aspect of the design. They also recommended that the applicant provide photos of the materials as installed to be able to show what they would look like. They did also make some suggestions to the development team about manual deconstruction of the existing structure. It's not listed as a historic structure on our historic preservation list. That's not really related to the approval criteria for this project, but they did make some suggestions to the development team for their consideration as part of the demolition or the deconstruction of that existing building as part of the construction and development of the project. Moving on to the parking modification. So the proposed development is 55 units of residential development, 1 and 2 bedroom units, priced at that 80% of median family income. The development is proposed as a transit-oriented development, very close to the Orange Line as well as to the TriMet bus depot that's located here on Jackson Street. They are proposing as part of their overall package the close proximity, of course, to light rail and the bus route. They are proposing to have a zip car available for the tenants in the building to be parked across the street. And they are proposing effectively a 45% increase in secure bike parking for the building than what would be required under the code. Beyond the by right reductions in off-street parking, and this is detailed in the staff report, the applicant is proposed to provide no on-site parking, rather to market the development as a transit-oriented development with ample bike parking, and to provide 43 off-site spaces that would be available for lease to tenants for a monthly fee. And what you see here on the screen are the approval criteria for a modification for parking. Okay. So as far as what would be required for the development, so 55 units in the DMU zone, so 1 space required per unit. There by right reductions for being in the downtown mixed use zone, as well as an additional 10% for extra bike parking that they're providing over and above what is the requirement. So that gets them down to 36 parking spaces that would be required by the code for this development of 55 units. Again, their proposal is 43 off-site parking spaces. So their parking ratio is 0.78 parking spaces per dwelling unit. Their proposal for the 2 off-site locations is that 20 spaces would be available at the Oddfellows Hall at the north end of Main Street, which is approximately a half mile, and I measured it on our GIS, and that's approximately an 8-minute walk to those parking spaces. And then 23 spaces would be available on the site that's essentially across the street from this site at 2305 Southeast Washington Street. The application package included the agreements with those properties and those property owners as far as what the time frame for those leases, the cost for those spaces, et cetera, are available. We also identify within the staff report kind of this idea of a transportation demand management program. I think this is something that the commission reviewed and discussed as part of the COHO development review as well. In addition to those offsite spaces that are proposed that we just talked about, the development would provide lobby monitors within the building for TriMet bus and train departures, a designated rideshare pickup and drop-off area at the front of the building, as well as a zip car that would be available for use by the tenants that would be parked across the street on TriMet property. So those are all components of this transportation demand management program, as well as I believe it's 82 bike parking spaces and bike racks that would be available for the tenants as well. This might look familiar. We do have a downtown parking management strategy that was developed in 2018. And a lot of what this development is proposing is something that has been mentioned or has been talked about within that downtown parking management plan or that strategy. Specifically talking about providing these parking spaces for lease off-site. And again, as we commented as we noted in the staff report, that accomplishes two important things. Charging for off-site parking means that only those who need parking pay for it, rather than all tenants paying for the construction of parking on site. So we're decoupling parking from housing. And using underutilized existing parking areas reduces construction costs, and it optimizes the use of existing downtown parking rather than building more. This includes additional parking spaces being built on the site located at 23 parking management strategy, like this identification of existing parking that's underutilized within the downtown. The staff recommendation, as identified in the staff report, is to approve the application package for the variance, the height variance, the downtown design review, parking quantity modification, and the transportation facilities review. And staff recommends adoption of the recommended findings and conditions of approval that were included within the package. You have decision-making options tonight, of course. You could approve the application with the recommended findings and conditions of approval. You could approve the application with additional modifications to those findings and conditions, and we would need to read those modifications into the record. To continue the hearing, or you could deny the application. We would need findings for denial, and we would need to come up with those as part of this hearing process. The 120-day deadline for this application has been extended as required by the code, but it would have been April 7th of 2022, but we do have that waiver on record as part of the application. The applicant team is here to present the project as well, and of course to answer any questions, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have right now. I'm going to stop sharing.
Vera, I have a question. This is Lauren. I want to understand why in the DLC portion of your presentation, several sections were struck out. Can you clarify why, for example, architecture was not a criterion?
Oh, of course. Sorry. Yes, the architecture criterion was struck because the design of the building is because it's an all residential building. It was designed against the multifamily design guidelines. There's a section in the code in 907 that talks in the downtown design review that an applicant can choose to either design an all residential building against the multifamily design guidelines and standards or the downtown design standards. and the applicant elected to design the building against the multifamily design guidelines. So the downtown design guidelines for architectural design wouldn't apply because this was designed against the multifamily design guidelines, not the downtown design standards. And the code allows an all residential building to do that.
Okay, and I have another question. For the parking areas that are being reserved for lease, how does that impact the required parking calculation for those buildings? Is there an overage of parking that they're taking advantage of, or how is the city addressing that particular element?
The Oddfellows site has an overage of parking, and that's been that way for many years. That building and that parking area has been there for a long time. The site across the street, part of the agreement is to construct those additional parking spaces. So those aren't spaces that are currently on the site. They would be constructed as part of this project.
Okay,
So,
I'm seeing.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Vera.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Hemer, your hand is raised.
Thank you. So this might be a little technical, but if I remember right, in the downtown, in the DMU zone, you're not allowed legally to have a standalone parking lot anymore. And I believe that our conditions of approval say that in perpetuity, this parking has to exist. So my question is, does this create a standalone parking lot?
I would say it does not, because these are shared parking agreements. So
but they stand in perpetuity, so they can't be developed. They can't ever be anything but a parking lot with this agreement. Is that correct?
The agreements are for the use of these properties, and I believe they are 3-year agreements that can then be renewed. But if one of these sites were to redevelop, they can do that. This is not, it doesn't lock the Oddfellows into being parking.
So does the condition of approval then state that they have to find 46 spots somewhere else?
The condition of approval specific to the parking, sorry, I'm going to go straight to it. Hold on a second. Is that the provision of the 43 parking spaces, that the ongoing implementation of a transportation demand management program is required as part of the operation of the building, and that includes the provision of 43 off-site parking spaces as identified in the application package. So the way we've crafted the language of the condition is that, you know, the elements of their transportation demand management program, which includes that includes the provision of 43 off-site parking spaces, has to continue. So that would be something that they
and so if they don't find a parking spot, or if they don't find another parking lot, if one of these do not renew their leases, does that mean that building can't be vacant, or that there can't be any tenants in the building? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for what happens, you know, at that point, what we do. They would be in violation of a condition of the approval of the building. I don't know that we would vacate the building, but they would need to provide some kind of parking so that they would be in compliance with the approval, their land use approval.
Okay, and do you know how many vacant spots are in Axletree in their parking garage right now?
I was told by the manager of the building, by Tom Brennicky, that they are at 80% occupancy of their parking that are in that building.
With about a 95% occupancy of residents.
I think that's right. But yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hemer. All right, Commissioner Edge.
Thank you, Chair. And this is really a follow-up to Greg's question. What I was curious about is, would it be, maybe this is a question for would it be advisable to revise that condition so that it leaves flexibility in the definition of the PDM program, so that it's not contingent upon something that may not be able to be addressed in the future? Specifically the 43 spaces may or may not be needed, more may be needed, less may be needed, but that may change and be dynamic over time. I think I wonder is the important part policy-wise to the city that they're maintaining a TDM program that is managing the transportation demand and the parking demand over time, even if that is dynamic and changes. So should the condition be a little bit more flexible about that? And Justin, that's mostly for you, I think.
I don't have a specific answer to that question. Certainly, over time, things could change. And you're right, those spaces might not be required in the future, or required is the wrong word, might not be necessary. So I would think that if the Planning Commission were so inclined, that condition could provide some sort of flexibility based on a study that shows that those parking spaces are no longer needed. However, I think establishing the standard that would need to be met would be difficult to house in a condition, because we don't know what that standard will be in the future. So, there's some inherent troubles with trying to build in flexibility when we don't know what the future holds.
So, Justin, that's great comment. I think we should kind of table that conversation and be sure to come back to it, because it's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. That was I provide that answer as an informational thing. That's something for you to deliberate when it's time to talk about it.
Appreciate that. All right, Commissioner Sherman.
Thank you, Chair. This is, I think, a question for staff, kind of again related to parking and transportation demand management. Aside from the developer trying to secure these spots for at least 3 years, parking spots for at least 3 years, were you aware of any kind of other alternative approaches, such as subsidizing bus passes or other things like that could help make progress on reducing parking demands?
I am not aware of those on the applicant's part, if that's what you mean. That's a great question for the applicant team as part of, and maybe they're going to cover that in their presentations, what else. But that wasn't part of what their application package included.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherman. I'll move on to Commissioner Kostrobody.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Now, this is also about parking. I'm just curious, just to clarify, so at the end of the 3-year lease with the Oddfellows, for example, if they were to not want to renew that, there's really, at this point right now, there's no contingency to what will happen with parking, correct?
Right, and I think this kind of goes back to the conversation that the commission ought to have about how that condition of approval is written. But the way the condition was written is that there would need to be a provision of off-site parking spaces, that there would need to be consistent with this package of information that they've submitted as part of the project and as part of that transportation demand management program. So it's a great question. What happens in 3 years or 6 years? Maybe they renew it and it's additional time. I think that's also a question that hopefully that the applicant team be able to respond to as well. But the way the condition is written, it was sort of intended that this is this ongoing thing, and that they would be managing their demand. But I think, as Commissioner Edge brought up, maybe there's some additional tweaking we need to do to the wording of that condition to provide that flexibility, if that's what the commission is looking for.
Thank you.
And Vera, I just wanted to add, I think that last time we talked about it as well, there was at some point kind of a trigger for the city as well to be able to have oversight of some of these locations and developments downtown where parking is reduced, right? So that we're not looking at parking into neighborhoods where these residents are continually relying on parking that's not associated with the building. And so I'm kind of flagging that as this is yet another building where we're talking about that, and something we should be tracking. Commissioner Sherman?
Thank you, Chair. I think I also just wanted to kind of clarify what would happen if this was approved as is, and then 4 years out, if those parking spots aren't provisioned anymore. What level of recourse does the city have? Is it literally just you have to vacate your building, or are there financial penalties that could come before anything like that? Could you just help us understand what existing mechanisms, if any, are there for accountability on that?
And Commissioner Sherman, I'm not quite sure that that's pertinent to the discussion here. I do think that's important, but is that necessary?
No, you're probably right. And we can maybe ruminate on that in a later part of our agenda.
I think that's a very important point. Let's make note of that. So, commissioners, are there any other questions for staff before we invite our applicants? I'm seeing no hands raised, so I'm going to keep on. Testimony. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items which have been included in our meeting packet?
We have not. I know I did send the DLC recommendation after the packet because the meeting was just held on Thursday, but we posted it for public review as well. So that I guess I would qualify that as a comment that was submitted after the packet, but that's it.
Okay. Vice Chair Edge.
Did we not receive a communication from TriMet that was received right before the meeting?
Sorry, you're right. Thank you. Yes, I was scrambling with all of the things that were happening. So yes, an email comment was sent from TriMet in support of the project. I forwarded that to the commission. I believe it came in at 5:30 this evening.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay, this is an opportunity for the applicant to testify. Would the applicant or representative like to comment? If so, would the applicant please state their name first and then your city of residence as you're being entered into this panel here? Anybody who is presenting, please just remember, state your name and city of residence before speaking.
Okay, I'm promoting everybody that I can see that I think is on the team. So if I miss someone, please let me know. And Jennifer, Dylan, Kelly Clifton should be promoted as well.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm trying to do that. She doesn't seem to be moving over, but I'm trying. Oh, there she goes. Okay. Please let me know if I've missed anybody.
Everyone, I think I can start off. My name's Jessie Ledesma. My firm is Homework Development. I'm the developer for this project, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Justman, if you don't mind pulling up our presentation, I can kick us off.
And if I may, through the chair, Justman, I see that you have your hand raised. Do you have a question or?
You're on mute. Still on mute. So
Justman, we can't hear you, but if you're able to advance to the intro page, I can start with the introductions. Well, while she's pulling that up, I'm sure she'll jump right back on. Happy to be here in front of all of you today. This is an exciting project for us and one that we think would be a great addition to Milwaukee's downtown. The project generally aligns really well with the city of Milwaukee's housing affordability strategy and the city's vision for 2040. And that was the document that we really studied in our design here. In addition to providing 80% median family income workforce affordable housing, as Vera described, contingent on financing, the project really adds to the downtown revitalization goals of the location and provides really smart densification adjacent to mass transit infrastructure. It also will be a really high quality mass timber kind of flagship apartment building that we think will add a lot to that downtown core. And again, just with that much needed workforce housing, serving an important segment of the Milwaukie community. Before we launch into the design, we're going to we're going to walk you through the design quickly, and then we are going to get back to the topic of parking, because I know that's of interest to this group, and from the comments that we've heard so far. We've invited Kelly Clifton. She's going to speak at that portion of the presentation. Kelly Clifton is a transportation research specialist, and she can talk about her background and some of the research that she's done for this project. Just from the development standpoint, I would just add that the provision of structured parking, especially with construction costs where they are today, is really at odds with the goal of developing more equitable housing options. So I really urge you all to kind of look at our proposal through that framework. And with everything that we're presenting here today, we feel like we're presenting a project that's really well balanced in that regard. So Jennifer Dillon is also here today. She's the co-developer with Wild Hair Development, and WPA Works Progress Architecture will take us through the design.
I think she's typing. Vera, we're not able to hear them.
From underwater.
Vera.
Audio is separate. Okay, I guess is that the phone number, if I may, 503-234? Is that the right? I'll go ahead and I've unmuted the one phone number that's in the attendees list. I don't know if that's correct.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Fantastic. Technology for the win. Thank you. Apologies for that. Our line here is separate from the video feed, so we have that issue occasionally. Let me close out here and back to the main presentation. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time tonight, and especially Vera for giving kind of the meat of our presentation. But I'm happy to run through a visual that we put together tonight with some plans and renderings to give everybody a little bit more idea of what the project will look like and what we have built into the program. So basic site info, I think we've already covered pretty well. This is locating the site as well as a few existing context views of the house on the site from both directions along Southeast Washington. Also locating our main transit lines with the MAX, the bus lines, and bike transits. This is a newer map that we threw in to help describe a little bit more of the surrounding context as it relates to the parking request and where the parking is located and the possible routes to said parking. Our site is here again, and the most adjacent parking directly across the street is located here. As mentioned, the additional 20 spaces are located about a half mile away. Our mapping gave you a slightly slower 11-minute walk, but nonetheless not too far and along the main street, which has significant offerings in terms of food and coffee, as well as a few of the neighborhood features here that we're pointing out. Specifically, we have the high school directly to the southeast of us. There's a post office over here, kind of next to the MAC station, which is just right down the line from us. We've got St. John's Baptist Church across the street with a tall spire. The Wonderland Cinema, of course, Milwaukie Park, and the Farmers Market here.
Jessica, this is the chair, can I just interrupt real quick? Two things. Would you mind putting it into presentation mode just to make this as maximized as we can? And then also, did you indicate what your city of residence was?
We are Portland here, Portland, Oregon.
Okay, and that's your personal, okay.
That's my personal, yep.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. This zooms in a little bit more just in context of those existing parking lots and the proposed parking spaces. Additionally, I think that we've got Kelly Clifton on to talk a bit more about parking after we've run through the architectural set here. As mentioned, the site is really ideally situated for public transportation with the MAC station a block away, up to 9 TriMet bus routes within an eighth of a mile, and then additionally some program offerings including the transit trackers in the lobby, as well as pretty significant bike parking with 82 spaces. I think they're already covered kind of the base requirements. We actually had 39, but it sounds like 36 was our minimum parking spots, and with these 2 lots, we're proposing 43 total, as well as the off-site zip car, which would be 44. I have a few more photos here for site and kind of context of additional buildings. Right across the street is the Axle Tree. A little bit further to the east is the new Coho Point development. Going the other direction to the west is the renovated high school. And directly across the street from us is the commercial complex with the parking lot that is proposed for off-site. Context of kind of more downtown Milwaukie, we have Milwaukie Lumber for reference, as well as the main street here. And then back to kind of directly adjacent to us on the east is a dental office, here you can see. And to the south is a parking lot and additional commercial buildings. And then one more context of the Milwaukie Academy of the Arts down in the corner. Additionally, the requests we had from our last review were to provide some mapping context and some view perspectives to get an idea of how our building sits on the site and in conjunction with adjacent buildings and the view out to the river. So I have a few here. This one looking from the southwest. So river, clearly here, looking past through Coho Point and Axle Tree. And then one looking from the other direction, so looking from the northeast. Again, views directly to the river would be previously blocked by Axle Tree or Coho Point. The lot directly to our east, as I mentioned, is the dentist office, which actually doesn't have any window walls on that immediate facade, so it does not have current views, as does the eye care office across the street, also to our east. A few updated renderings from the last presentation, just to show additional context. As mentioned, the building mass really looks to break down with a central courtyard cutaway. Additionally, we cut back at the right-of-way street facade where we have a public terrace and a very open lobby that looks through to the courtyard beyond. Here you can see a little bit more in terms of shadow line and facade articulation where we're breaking down the masses vertically. Along each facade, there's flashing and a reveal that breaks away along with the unit pattern. An aerial view giving you a little bit more view down into that courtyard, as well as seeing the step down for the rooftop deck. And then more intimate views into the courtyard. So here on the left, we have that public terrace, whereas the courtyard is much more of a private tenant use. We've got some seating arrangements and more casual kind of seating offerings along the courtyard, as well as our main circulation stair down to the bike storage below. Additional view of the terrace, more from the right-of-way, where we have a screen wall for both sound from the max and the rail, as well as buffering to the more private courtyard beyond. These are some more specific site views for landscaping. Again, central courtyard where we have a large stormwater feature, as well as seating, bench seating, and casual seating arrangements that kind of step down. Basement level below, kind of a retained fern and rock wall up to the upper terrace that aligns directly with the right-of-way here and feeds out to the main sidewalk. This is the upper terrace that all residents have access to, where we additionally have landscaping along the perimeter and kind of loose furnishing seating arrangements. Varieties and the plans. So we're going to go from the bottom up. This is our lowest floor that you access again through the lobby and down the courtyard. The additional level that we're requesting really allows us to get kind of that cutaway massing that you see, as well as all the amenity spaces that we're providing, kind of bolstering in this level the bike parking specifically, so that we can provide the 82 parking spaces instead of just the 55. Main level, or level 1, is where you access from the street. We have a pretty generous lobby and amenity space, as well as shared laundry and mail. This bar then exits out onto kind of the open courtyard, where you can either go down the seating areas or the bikes, or you can come through to the open air circulation corridor for the south side bar of units. The gray zone here is our utilities and support spaces, large trash room, and all the utilities along the side access alley. And then our typical floors, you see an arrangement of both 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom offerings. The unique massing really allows for a pretty fantastic offering of windows that you wouldn't necessarily get in a double-loaded corridor, because we do have this open air circulation. It allows for windows on both sides of the 1 bedrooms and at least 3 walls of windows on the 2 bedrooms. Steps up through the floors till we get to the 6th floor, where we cut away both to reduce the mass along the south and to provide that roof deck and views out to the river. Roof. And then elevations. These just kind of give you the technical locations for our reveals and for the parapet jogs, where we're looking to further break down the facade by the unit bays. Additionally, you'll see at the ground floor, specifically along the public face, we've pulled up that facade and stepped back to allow for more public interaction, as well as a change in materials. We've got a composite metal panel here at the lower corner, and then significant glazed storefront that leads around to the terrace and views all the way through the courtyard. The majority of the units are clad in a vertical box rib, and then the reveals are a recessed flashing. That follows around the building here at the kind of alley walkway. That continued black metal panel turns the corner and sheaves the main utilities, and then the unit residences have the vertical box rig, and then our open air corridors, you'll see a perforated guardrail as we go through. Additional views and breakdowns of the facades where the parapet jogs up and the reveals straight down. View looking into the west, so you see kind of the end of our U-shaped courtyard beyond there. And the short leg to the north with the open air corridors and the perforated box rib guardrails, and then beyond here is where we have the vertical wood siding at the location where the tenants are going to be in contact with their entries and have that day-to-day interaction materials. And then the longer corridor on the other side of the open courtyard to the south. So just to help visualize a little bit more reality of the materials, we've provided some precedents. Here on the left is the intent for the vertical box rib and a similar application of the perforated box rib that you would see at our open air corridors as a guardrail. At the ground floor and the public face, we have the composite metal siding. And then at the open air corridors, we're proposing a vertical wood siding. Again, here for just a little bit more zoomed in material look. And one final view. I think if we can hand it over to Kelly for a quick run through of the parking and then maybe do questions after that, if that makes sense.
Sounds good to me. Shall I take it? Okay. I'm Kelly Clifton. I'm a resident of Portland. I'm the principal of Clifton Currens LLC, and I'm also a professor of civil engineering at Portland State University. I have been, I cannot share my screen until they stop sharing, but my research is in the area of transportation policy and planning, and one of the threads of my research is looking at how we can do a better job of coordinating land development and transportation. And I've worked on a number of projects in Oregon, in the Portland region, and in California, looking at affordable housing, looking at market rate housing, and looking at the kinds of questions that have been raised here today. So I was asked by the development team to prepare some thoughts based on my research and the research of others that are either of similar context, so somewhere in the Portland region or in other sites in the world that we could bring to bear on this. So I will share my screen, I think. Can you see that? I can't. There, is that the right, am I showing the right thing? I hope. Okay, so our recommendations are not unlike the recommendations of planning staff. So based on my work and the work of others, allowing this project to be developed with no parking on site for residents, but that has adjacent shared parking, as well as parking available for the use of delivery and rideshare services and Zipcar, it makes sense for the direction of development for Milwaukie and for the region. I think there are some other things that can be done to mitigate some of the concerns that we hear today and some of the use of a vehicle and ownership of a vehicle. One of those is a parking management plan, and that's in the power of the city. So there was the question that came up about what could be done for 3 years out to mitigate some of that uncertainty. And one of those things is thinking about instituting a residential permit parking program, as well as appropriate parking pricing in the downtown and central area. So that's out of the hands of the development team, of course, but it is something that the city itself could do to mitigate some of those concerns. And then within what the development team can do is thinking about strategies for residents. So what kinds of solutions are available in terms of transportation demand management, providing alternatives, and basically making it easier to not own a car or use a car. So again, this is a little bit of a repeat of what you've heard in all three presentations, but we think that this development is perfect and consistent with the vision for Milwaukie. It increases the supply of housing, that housing being workforce-oriented housing. It encourages denser development in the city center. And that in turn will promote the use of active transportation modes and transit. It encourages a more walkable neighborhood and increases the economic vitality. And so if you thinking about economic vitality in particular, we know that retail often follows residences. So thinking about things like grocery stores, a grocery store locating in the downtown area is not going to happen until there's sufficient population to serve that market. So by increasing that housing, it can solve some of the problems that were brought up today by then following, the retail will follow residences. This is consistent with the vision outlaid by the city of Milwaukie in its own comprehensive plan. So I'm not going to read the plans to you, but there are several policies where the ideas that are stated in this development are reinforced by the policies laid out in the comp plan. The site is highly accessible. So again, it's a bit of a repeat here, but there are 11 transit sites within a half mile. There's a walk score of 87, a bike score of 85, and the nearest grocery store is 1 mile away that is accessible by transit and also offers a home delivery option. So this is has very robust conditions currently to support not owning a car. And as you think about where the vision for the central city is into the future, it will become easier and easier to get around without a car. So based on my research and the research of others, there's really sort of a trifecta that make these conditions possible for a parking reduction or being developed without parking at all. So first of all, just currently in Milwaukie, we know that renters own fewer cars than homeowners. So this is based on evidence from the census. We know that residents in transit-oriented development also own fewer cars, and this is evidence from the Portland region, and not just the city of Portland, but the suburbs of Portland. And then the third factor is affordable housing, that renters in affordable housing own fewer cars. And so this development meets all three of these conditions. And then thinking about how people who will own a car might use a car, they will use it at lower rates. Again, based on this trifecta of being rental, transit-oriented, and affordable. It was outside the scope of my work in this project to do a parking supply and demand study, but based on a conservative estimate of vehicle ownership, there seems to be sufficient parking capacity to absorb that parking demand in the evenings. The city's own downtown parking management strategy outlines the fact that there is sufficient demand, that there's only about a 60% on-street occupancy rate of parking, and off-street occupancy is only about half of the capacity. And then also that there's 1,000 off-street spots and 260 on-street spots during the peak hours. My team did go and do a visual inspection 2 times. So one was during school operating hours, and then the other was on a Saturday. And it suggested that there was sufficient capacity on street to absorb the potential parking needs of this site. Parking is free in the city, so we know that when things are free, people consume more of them. So if there was a concern about having more on-street parking capacity, the city could implement a parking management strategy that had charged parking and could also, again, have this residential parking plan that would provide permits for residents downtown. And then finally, again, I've talked about this, but what are some solutions then that could be thought through for the site and implemented to reduce vehicle ownership? So I've mentioned two of those. I mentioned the parking management plan, also the shared parking agreement. So there's more than sufficient parking in the shared parking agreement to, I think, satisfy the needs of anyone that would bring a car that would rent there. There will be real-time transit information, as Vera mentioned in her presentation, and the option for car sharing. And then we know that ride-hailing is a popular option. So again, that's a supplemental service that's available for people that live there. And then facilitating the pickup and drop off of people who are using ride-hailing, as well as having goods delivered. Bike parking and support, again, makes it easier for people to cycle. And so a combination of all these things helps to mitigate the fact that in the near term, of course, people are going to own a car. Not everyone will own a car, but the idea is that we make it as easy as possible for them to use alternatives to private vehicles. So that's a very short presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, team. Let's see. I'll start with our commissioners. Are there any clarifying questions? Commissioner Hemer, I see your hand is raised. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I should have unmuted myself, then lowered my hand. I noticed that your plan with the mitigation was that you're going to expand the parking in the doctor's office. I call it the doctor. I think it's still a doctor there. In the doctor office across the street there. Is there any, who's paying for that construction, and is there any plan to put any charging stations in there?
I can answer that. Thank you. It's a great question. So that is a negotiation that we had with the owner. They opted to make those improvements on their lot. We did do a rough design for them to illustrate how they could add more parking to their property. And again, because of the financial side of it, they really would prefer to spend the money on the front side, upgrade their property, and then start the rent with us on year one. And just as a point of clarification, that agreement right now is written so that we have at least 3 years of that parking agreement before there's an option to renew for another 7. That really is written for us. We will have that option unless they sell. So the only way currently in the agreement for them to exit the agreement is to sell their property. And that's not just them saying, excuse me, oh, we decided we're going to maybe sell. That's actually them showing us a purchase and sale agreement and saying we have sold. So the 3 years is to honestly kind of assess how much demand there is for parking, because I think it's an interesting question that we are providing parking. We want to go above and beyond with the parking. But if there's not a lot of demand for the parking, we might reduce the number of, if our minimum's 36 and we're not commanding that after 3 years, it's something for us to go, well, maybe we need to go down to our required parking, for example. But we're planning on using it. It is at $80 a space. I believe Axle Tree's at $130. So the cost is proportionate to the workforce housing offering that we are making. And so we feel like that's a great way to go. But again, it's not after 3 years they say, oh, we don't want to anymore. It's at 3 years, then do we want to renew for another 7? I hope that clarifies that.
Jennifer, I appreciate it. I'm going to cut this off because it's not part of the applicable criteria that we understand necessarily how those sites are managed, but I do think we can have this conversation. Commissioner Hemer, I just want to stick directly to that criteria. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to go to the next commissioner. Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. I was curious from the development team if you could share any more information about the workforce developments, the workforce side of this. There's a lot that's kind of talked about in the application package around the benefits of workforce housing, and yet I think we've heard that isn't necessarily secured. And so if you could share more information on that would be really useful.
Sure. This is Jessie Ledesma of Homework Development. I can respond to that. And please excuse me, there's a train stop next to my office. So if you hear the clanging in the background, that's where that's coming from. So as mentioned, we're targeting an 80% workforce housing program. This is often referred to as the missing middle. And so it's missing middle in that it's in between the regulated capital A affordable housing that's typically financed through low-income housing tax credits and other sources that are typically serving the households earning up to 30, 50, or 60% income. That's typically considered, low income or very low income affordable housing. Missing middle or workforce housing at the 80% median family income that we're targeting is really in between that lower income affordable housing and where market rates land. And there's just a large demand in the market for housing that's just a bit below market rate, but for residents that don't necessarily have to qualify for that lower income housing. We recently secured a Metro transit-oriented grant of $350,000 in support of our workforce housing goals. We are looking forward to the city of Milwaukie enrolling their CET funds later this year that I believe this project would qualify for. And we're also waiting for Oregon Housing and Community Services to release several grant sources this year that we would also qualify for. So we're on track to secure funding that supports that program. But since some of those sources are not yet secured today, that's where you heard us kind of hedge on the contingent on financing. But that's the goal of the project. That's what we've committed to Metro so far. And those are all the funding sources that we will be applying for later this year.
Thank you. I'm going to move on then to Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. So with respect to the heights variance, where you're requesting the extra floor, is it fair to say that the extra floor you're requesting is both uninhabitable and is necessary to support your TDM program? Because it's a bike parking floor. Is that a correct read on the extra floor?
The extra floor is actually it's not an extra units. Justin, is that right?
It is an extra floor of units.
The height, but we've been able to, it's within the height maximum, but we've been able to fit an extra floor of units within that height. And that's another kind of critical design component that allows us to hit our workforce housing goals, was because we were able to fit those additional units.
I understood it was 9
Did
units.
I misinterpret?
I believe so.
Did I misinterpret the plan that or the profile where the bottom floor is it's not habitable, but it's just the bike parking and utility closet? Is that counted as a floor in this?
I believe in Jessamyn's presentation, she pointed out the nine additional units we're able to include because of the extra floor, plus some flexibility with more amenity space, including the bike parking. That was one example of the kind of amenity space we're able to fit because of the extra floor.
Okay, I got you. So then, separate from that, but on the topic of the TDM, do you have any other projects in other jurisdictions where you have similar TDMs that require you to maintain a specific number of off-site parking spaces the way that this condition, or the way that we have our draft conditions of approval written right now?
This is a unique situation. So the answer to that is no. For the city of Portland at this point to develop workforce housing such as we're proposing here, no parking would be required. And so, the provision of the offsite parking that we're showing is we're really kind of trying to give our very best effort to go above and beyond and deliver offsite parking to the extent we can. I think, as Jen mentioned, because we don't control those properties, those owners obviously have the ability to sell their property in the future, but is our intention to stick to those agreements and renew them to the extent that our residents have demand for those parking spots.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Commissioner Ernst.
Hi, thank you. This is a beautiful project, and I appreciate all your guys' work on everything. I just have a quick question, again, kind of regarding parking and loading and unloading. So it looks like there's just that one little area for load unload. Is that where moving trucks would also fit for moving residents in and out, and maybe multiple residents that are using zip cars or shared cars if they go to Costco or they go to IKEA and they want to load in and out? Is there adequate space for one or two or three separate units to be loading and unloading at the same time? Or is that blocking the street?
Jasmine, are you able to pull up the site plan?
Yeah. Well, probably let me go back to the landscape plan, which I'll have. Is that going to do it, or do you want me to go to the architectural plan?
I'm just trying to see, or maybe Jen, you can point this out. We haven't mentioned this yet, but we're in discussions with TriMet for a small parcel of land adjacent, where we would be able to utilize that space exactly for this purpose, for loading and unloading. Jen, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, actually, that would be a designated Zipcar space that would be leased through Zipcar, and that is immediately across the street on TriMet property. But yes, there is the loading unload space in front. To some degree, that is a property management issue. I work on another totally unrelated project on Williams Avenue with 70 units, and we have one load unload space for those 70 units, and it needs to get scheduled when people load and unload, and that's kind of par for the course in managing that property.
So just regarding not having an on-site parking lot, that is my concern, is that when you don't have an on-site parking lot, how do residents park or load and unload even moving trucks? It ends up blocking the road for everybody else that is trying to, drive there. And it's a huge hassle for moving trucks, or you buy furniture, or, there's lots and lots. So there needs to be adequate loading and unloading zones.
Commissioner Ernst, I'm going to stop you because that's part of our discussion as commissioners, but do you have further questions specifically?
That's just my question is there, I don't see where there's adequate for 55 units. I'm asking, is there adequate load unload zone? So I appreciate the zip car across the street. I do think that, that's great, but there's a difference between going to a zip car and unloading a couple bags and actually moving in and out, and how that impacts our city and transportation around the building.
So Jennifer, do you have a direct answer for the question regarding loading at the building? I think it's maybe a yes or no.
We do have a loading zone right in front of the building.
Okay.
Designated loading zone.
Is one loading zone for that's adequate for one moving truck that can fit a moving truck?
Yes.
But okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Ernst. I'm seeing Commissioner Kashrabadi.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. And thank you for the presentation to our attendees. I just, my question again, and I know Commissioner Sherman had asked similar, I know you just had gone over it, but just for my clarification, because I don't think I caught it all, the units priced at 80% MFI. Can you clarify again for me? I'm sorry. The contingent upon securing subsidies. Can you go through that one more time? I'm just curious to know how that works, contingent on subsidies, and what happens if those subsidies aren't achieved.
Yes, absolutely. There are several funding sources that will be released later this year through both the City of Milwaukie and the State Housing Finance Agency that this project would be eligible for and competitive for. And so our plan and our intention is to secure those financing sources in order to ensure that this project is affordable at 80% MFI.
Okay. Commissioner Kashrabadi, you're on mute. Do you have another question?
Yeah, my second part to that was, so if those aren't achieved, is this just become a market rate rent development?
We sure hope not. That's not our goal or intention with this. If we aren't able to secure any financing, we would likely have to scale up closer to the 100% median family income rents, which can get on par with market rate, depending on the unit types. For 2-bedroom, those do still sit below market. But that's not the goals or the intention of the project. But we can't control the public financing
right
today. Yeah.
I love this because it's affordable housing. Just so you know, I'm not against it at all. I just want to make sure that there's no like, oh well, we're market rents now, and that was it. So thank you for that. Okay,
Commissioner Sherman.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of workforce housing at 80% MFI, are you thinking about that for a 10-year period, a 20-year period, a 50-year period?
Yeah, that's a good question as well, because each of these financing sources have their own period of affordability that are required. So Metro, the source that we have today, requires a 15-year affordability period. I haven't seen the City of Milwaukee's CET regulations yet. I would assume that would also carry a 15-year affordability period, but that Metro grant would sort of set the minimum because that's already a financing source that we have. And if other sources layer in that extend that, then we will absolutely meet those requirements.
And just as a follow-up question, because I think Commissioner Kasrabadi and I are thinking similar things, I noticed in the findings of approval, there's no conditions of approval related to the provision of affordable housing. Would the development team be willing to accept a condition of approval, something about 80 to 100% for 15 years?
Commissioner Sherman, I have to stop you there because it's just not part of the applicable criteria for this particular discussion. Although we value it here, it's just not part of this particular application.
I would suggest that it might be when we're talking about adding a 6th story for the provision of 9 more units and off-site parking for the provision of workforce housing, which is in many ways predicated upon lower parking demand.
I'll ask the city attorney to weigh in, but I'm going to hold that position.
I would agree with the chair here. This isn't actually part of the approval criteria for the application, as represented by the applicant themselves, which said they might need to scale up to a higher amount. So I don't think you'll find anything in the approval criteria for the land use decision dictating that affordable housing is a consideration.
Happy to talk more about that during the deliberative step of our process.
Perfect. And that's the appropriate time. Let's see. I see Commissioner Kashrabadi.
Yes, just a quick question about the 15-year affordability. If the City of Milwaukie is 15 years also, does that make it a total of 30, or is it just 15? Like, do you add those two together?
No, typically it's just extended to whichever financing source has the longest. So if one source required 10 years and one source required 15 years, then we'd be held to the 15 years. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hemer, your hand is raised.
The DLC, or Design and Landmarks Commission or Committee, recommended kind of some sort of historical reference back to the back to the house that's there. Do you have any objections to reaching out to either the DLC members or a local historical society so that they can get pictures and documentations and maybe help you provide some remembrance of the building?
That is definitely on our mind. We've been discussing those recommendations, and we are looking into how best to honor those requests. I think a suggestion such as that is a very good one. So yes, all of that is under consideration.
I've got a question for the team. I'm also considering the review for downtown design, and I'm wondering why under pedestrian emphasis, most of the majority of the criteria is indicated as not applicable. That would be protect the pedestrian from the elements, provide places for stopping and viewing, create successful outdoor spaces, integrate barrier-free design. Is there someone on the team that can speak to that?
Jasmine, you're muted.
Yep, sorry. I'm happy to respond in that we coordinated with Vera pretty closely on which specific categories needed to be addressed given the height variance request, and that those were not amongst them. Although I think that given our dedication as well as the setback on the ground floor and the pretty significant public terrace that we would meet, a lot of those, it just wasn't requested as part of our response.
Okay. Are there any other, Vera?
Sorry, if I may, I just wanted to add to that because the design review was specific to the height variance. So the pedestrian emphasis and so on was deemed to be, irrelevant or inapplicable to the height variance aspect of the application.
Interesting. Okay. Are there other commissioners with questions before we move on? Going once. All right. I would just want to thank this team again for your presentation and the level of detail and conversation that we've been able to have about important topics such as parking. So thank you very much. I think I'm going to move on to the next part of our script here. I think we've come to a number of clarifying questions from the commissioners. This is opportunity to hear testimony relative to support for the application. Vera, can you help me understand if you're seeing anybody, but do we have anyone who wishes to speak in support of the application?
Sorry, and I'm checking right now, but could I ask Jasmine to stop sharing her screen so we can get that would be great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going over to sorry.
Yep, and I was just going to say, for those in attendance, this is the opportunity to use the raise your hand function in Zoom or the *9 so that we can recognize you.
Okay, I have Guy Ben has raised their hand, so I'm going to allow them to talk. And
Guy, if you are listening, please remember state your first and last name and then your city of residence.
Yeah, good evening, commissioners. My name is Guy Ben. I'm a resident of Lake Oswego, and I'm the program manager for transit-oriented development at TriMet. I've been listening into this evening's discussion, and I have also been working with the applicant on this project. I just want to reaffirm what I put in my email earlier today. We strongly support this project. It's bringing high-density workforce housing to downtown Milwaukie, and we applaud the efforts to find parking solutions and to maximize public transit, and also the use of mass timber and other innovations to bring sustainable development to Milwaukie. So that's my public statement. Thank you.
Chair, as a point of order, do we intend to limit testimony to three minutes?
And I wasn't seeing that was necessary. Vice Chair was thinking that we will definitely be efficient and make sure we're staying to the applicable criteria. Vera, are you noticing anybody else?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised this time. No.
Okay. With that, I'm just a quick check with commissioners. Any commissioners have questions for those who've testified in support? Seeing no hands raised, we're going to move on then to opposition. So this is the opportunity for those in the audience speaking in opposition. Again, *9 or use the raise your hand function in Zoom. And again, we will not be capping you at 3 minutes, but we will be asking you to stay specific to the applicable criteria here and let you know if necessary when we stray.
I see no hands raised, Chair Lisfeld.
Okay. And finally, neutral testimony. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak with neutral testimony for the project, please raise your hand.
I see no hands raised, Chair Lisfeld.
Team applicant, this is the opportunity for rebuttal, but seeing as though we have only testimony and support, I'm imagining there's no rebuttal.
I have a point, if it's okay, I would just like to make, I think is really to keep in mind, or for the committee to consider, which is that this site is site constrained. So parking, we did some studies on parking, and very, very limited parking can be constructed here, even if we wanted to, and price was no object. So it's there are restrictions above and beyond. You know, we can't just put in 36 parking spaces below. It's just not possible. It's hemmed in with the rail on one side and 2 other properties as well. So I just want to point that out. I think it's relevant for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Okay, then what we're going to do is go ahead and close this public hearing. The public testimony portion of this hearing on VR-2021-017 2206 Southeast Washington Street is now closed. Discussion by the commission. Vera, if you want, we can remove the applicant from the panel, or if you're intending, and we'll just wait for a second there, allow the commission to kind of collect their thoughts. Right off the bat, I'll ask who wants to start. We've got 2 hands. Okay. Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair.
Maybe this is when we should instigate and initiate the 3-minute timer.
Right before I start talking.
Go ahead.
Ultimately, I've reviewed the findings and the conditions of approval. I think the findings accurately reflect the evidence in the record. Certainly there's some element of discretion, to what we're talking about. But I think it clears its hurdles, and I think that what we're trying to do here, and it's downtown, it's that less than market rate housing. Again, this is the idea of using the shared parking. These are consistent with our policies, that we've been, looking to implement over the last several years, and ultimately adopted with the updated comprehensive plan. And so, really, this is the kind of development that our city leadership is trying to invite, into the downtown area. And I think that the applicant team has done a really good job of, presenting an attractive building, and addressing something that I, really have brought up a lot during our comprehensive plan policy development process, which was this concept of the orderly transition to a future with less parking. And I think that this does a really good job of that by, sparing residents the cost of constructing extremely extensive parking that would ultimately render this project, infeasible. And providing that parking, making sure that parking is, actually, provided and as part of a TDM that, should ultimately, over time. And I think that we need to look at our, condition of approval here, number 3, the language there. But, I think that, it allows us to adjust dynamically to, the changing needs of the city. And so I think this is a great project. It meets all of the criteria. With a little bit of a revision to that condition number 3, I think I'm happy to support this, as is. So really excited about this project and can't thank the team enough for the effort that they put into this.
Vice Chair Edge, could you just be more specific? Can I ask you to just clarify what you're saying relative to bullet point number 3 here?
I think that we need to. Okay. I think.
And then and just mention the page number 2 is helpful.
Okay, it's page 6.2, page 36. It's page 136 in the PDF, and it's condition number 3. And so it says, as per finding 7B2, the ongoing implementation of a transportation demand management program is required as part of the operation of the approved development, including, and then it enumerates, the provision of 43 off-site parking spaces as identified in the application package, lobby monitors displaying TriMet bus and light rail schedule information, the drop-off and pickup space in front of the building, and the dedicated zip car space located across the street from the development. The applicant must provide additional detail to city staff sufficient to demonstrate how the various strategies included in the TDM program that was provided as part of the applicant's submittal materials will be implemented, including the establishment of performance benchmarks and a regular monitoring component. Responsibility for ongoing implementation of the TDM program is not limited to the applicant, but will transfer to any future owner or operator of the approved development. So I think that really those last sentences really capture what's important, which is that there's an ongoing performance benchmarking and monitoring component, and that ultimately management administration of the TDM program becomes an administrative level function of the city. So I don't know that we need to require that first enumerated element of the TDM, which is the 43 off-site parking spaces. Mm-hmm. I would remove that entirely, but I'm open to discussion on that because, again, we're in what I think we're trying to do over the next 20 years is, again, facilitate this orderly transition to a lower parking, lower car use future. And the language here should support that by not requiring a specific amount of off-street parking, but then leaving that to the performance benchmarks and monitoring.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Chair. Can I look to the next commissioner to provide comment? I'll take that as a yes. Commissioner Arndt?
Okay, I just want to quickly say that I do feel like the criteria has been met for approval, so I'm good to go with that. And we've talked about long-term city planning. I've talked a lot about, my belief and what is going to happen with transportation. I think strongly that I would recommend for the development to build more load unload zones. And I think that that's going to be a challenge because I think even in the future, if the requirement for for parking off-site, that 36 or 43 or parking spaces goes down, people will still be using rideshare, and that load unload zone will need more load unload zones. So I mean, that's my concern long term, is that having just one space for load unload zones is going to be challenging if we have more and more buildings like this built. But I love this building. It's a beautiful design. It's needed. And as far as the market rate versus, I'm very glad and appreciative that they're trying with the workforce market rate. I think that that's wonderful, especially in this particular location. This is, it's downtown. It's, waterfront adjacent, and it's a beautiful area. And it's, I think this is a great project, so I'm happy to support it. But that's my only 2 cents, is that long term, I think buildings like this need to have more load unload zones.
Thank you, Commissioner Ernst. I appreciate that. Commissioner Massey, you've been quiet this evening. Let's hear from you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm very happy to see this affordable housing project come to us. It was something that we need more of, and so I'm glad to hear about this. Whenever the subject of reducing parking comes up, I'm always get concerned. But I will tell you that I think that this is a unique and project on a couple of points, and that it's right there by the Orange Line. It's near bus line stops. It has ample bike parking, and the developer has gone to considerable effort to mitigate the lack of parking spaces. And we don't know what the future holds, but I think that they've taken a reasonable approach to provide for parking if it's needed, and we have a way to downslope that if in fact it's not needed. So I would recommend keeping the 43 spaces in there, and we can, it can be downspaced from there at the 3-year interval during the TDM process and that kind of thing. So this is very different from the middle housing parking issue discussion that we had back in November because of the attributes, locations of this site. So I can support this with the existing approval criteria.
Thank you, Commissioner Massey. I think we've got, I'm counting one in support and one other commissioner who's seeing the criteria for 43 being struck as possible benefit. So I'm interested to hear from others. Commissioner Khosrowbadi.
Thank you, Chair. I also got to say that I do like this proposal and this development. Obviously, the main thing is just because of the affordable housing aspect of it. I say it every time. I don't think we do enough to incentivize that. The parking, I'm not concerned about the parking. I would approve it the way it is with the 43 until we, because we got 3 years to figure out what else to do. It gives us some flexibility, but at least it provides a minimum parking that currently is required. So, and I'm not too concerned about the reduction in parking, because honestly, 12 cars, there might not be even 12 people who own a car in that building, as we're the way that things are moving towards the future. So I'm all for it. I like it the way it is right now, with the minimum with the parking spaces, the 43.
Thank you, Commissioner Khosrowbadi. 2-1. Commissioner Hemer. Y'all keep dancing around my screen with the raising your hand, and it's
like a disco.
See, where did Greg go? And then Greg drops his hand and he moves again. I'm gonna have a shock.
So I'm going to take my same position that I did take on Coho Point. Because maybe some of you have not been on the Planning Commission for a long time, we did deviate. We changed the rules to the 25% plus the 5% for the bike because we realized that maybe demand for parking was that, but the rule still is on site. And if we take Commissioner Edge's suggestion to wipe off that 43 parking spots, that means 0. And I want you to realize that they're creating parking lot anyways to make this work. Plus, they're counting another 20 that is all the way down on the other side of town where a bus does not run either. So you still have to walk half the way to get up to your vehicle. So really, in all reality, don't also forget that this area is where the farmers market is designed to move to. This is supposed to be Party Central with the Adams Street connector. And all we are doing is clogging it up with more and more vehicles and not allowing the residents of Milwaukie who can't ride their bike over Highway 224 come downtown and park. So I'm going to stick to my guns with the on-site parking. I'm going to deny it on that basic fact that it does not make the criteria of on-site parking. I do appreciate the effort. It's not about the affordable housing. It's not about that. It is literally that somebody needs to at least stand up and say, hey, we should look at this in a realistic way. And maybe my realistic way is the old man way, but I still see it as reality. So I will be opposed. And please do not eliminate the 43 parking on there, because that means that they don't have to have any off-site parking.
Commissioner Hemer, I have a clarifying question for you on Adams Street that you're calling attention to. If parking there, if residents started to park there, which is a concern that I had brought up, that Adams Street is timed, right? You have to be able.
But not at night. And don't forget when the farmers market opens. And I can guarantee you that the city of Milwaukie, on past performance, will not have a tow truck out there at 8 o'clock in the morning hollowing those, because that's how these things work. You guys remember, well, you've probably never been in this situation, but on Morrison Bridge, if you cross over Morrison Bridge and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, to be able to make that lane open, they have 50 tow trucks out there pulling all these cars away. And so the only way to make this work is to actually start towing cars away. And so now these poor people who can probably barely afford their rent and their car, now you've stuck them and you're going to go stick it in a tow yard somewhere and give them even a larger bill. So I just look at it as more of a reality of today front. But if you take away the 43 parking spots in your finding, that means that they have to have 0 offsite. So,
Commissioner Hemer, that's why I brought it up, because I was also concerned about that part. And it's a partnership with the city. If we're going to, continue to go down this road, it's a partnership with the city in terms of monitoring and recognizing when we're going over our limits.
What happens is it becomes the city responsibility. It really has nothing to do with the landholders or their parking management plans. It just becomes the city's responsibility.
Right. And additional staffing in order to make sure that that's held. Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair. I think I wanted to return to the height variance. It was one of the things that I kind of was thinking about the most, and looking at the municipal code and the approval criteria on those height variances. The number 4, proposed height variance will result in a project that provides public benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't really think of any greater public benefits than affordable housing and workforce housing. And I'm not certain that the other and/or clauses would be things that I think this project also kind of helps us satisfy. So I think I just kind of wanted to return to that topic that I kind of introduced earlier about, having some stronger conditions of approval to make sure that we are actually getting an affordable housing project. Now, I believe the intent of the development team here, and clearly they have already done some work to secure some of that funding. But, as we're thinking about adding that 6th story, which, as the staff report itself notes is for 9 more workforce dwelling units, really want to make sure that we're getting those. So wanted to just kind of return to that topic separate from the parking topic.
So the workforce housing and affordable housing is not applicable criteria, as I mentioned, Commissioner Sherman, but you're saying you're weighing that in relationship to the other criteria where you're seeing value in that aspect of this project, but because it's not applicable and it's not required, it can't be held. It can't be.
I guess where I'm, and maybe I just need to hear more from some other folks, but when I'm looking at the 4th approval criteria on the height variance, this is chapter 19, 911.6, proposed height variance will result in a project that provides public benefits and or amenities beyond those required by the base zone standards, and that will increase downtown vibrancy and or help meet sustainability goals. I'm not sure how this project helps us meet our sustainability goals. I'm not sure how it provides amenities beyond those required by the base zone that will increase downtown vibrancy. I am sure that workforce housing, affordable housing is a public benefit. And so for me, that's where I see that fourth condition, of which code maybe suggests we need to meet all of those. That's where I see it kind of coming through. So that's kind of my own thinking and my own rationale there.
I want to keep on that thread. Does anybody want to speak specifically to that thought? Commissioner Khoshrabadi, and then I'll go to Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. I totally understand where Commissioner Sherman's coming from. And I get that it's not part of the criteria, but it is being proposed as an affordable housing complex. So shouldn't there be a way for us to have an assurance that it's going to be an affordable housing complex? Because that's how it's proposed. It's not being proposed as the possibility. They just put contingent on gaining subsidies. So can't we say contingent on getting the subsidies? This is an approval contingent on getting subsidies.
I'm looking at the city attorney who's on mute.
I still agree with the chair. Conditioning a land use approval based on the provision of affordable housing is not something that our code provides. Certainly, I believe the applicant has made representations of other public benefits. Commissioner Sherman points out that those are and or statements. We have definitely in other applications for planned developments that are also required to provide public benefits considered only one of a chain of and or statements. And if you wish to consider the fact that it is a public benefit for it to be affordable housing, which I think we probably all agree it is, in your assessment of whether or not the proposed development provides affordable housing, that's something you can consider. I'm definitely uncomfortable putting it in any sort of condition. The applicant, I believe, has expressly indicated both in their materials and in this hearing that they haven't secured that funding and can't make any guarantee of affordable housing at any particular level with any certainty. And so I think it's a very dangerous bridge to try to cross, put it into some sort of condition.
Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. So on that thread, I would just say that just as a point of reference, on a 10,000 square foot lot, adjacent to downtown, but it's about 10,000 square foot lot, which previously housed just one dwelling. We are looking at getting 55 dwellings. And just to compare, the Cheragino Farms, development produced 55 dwellings each of which is on a 10,000 square foot lot. And so I think really, you know, even if it's 80 to 100% MFI, like the applicant said, they'd have to fall back to if they didn't get that extra funding. I think that there's a public benefit inherent in, you know, using this land right next to a light rail station so efficiently. I think that it makes a ton of sense in that respect. So I'm happy to support the height variance on that basis. I don't think that we need to condition or allude to, you know, conditioning, you know, on the basis of, you know, whether it's 80 or 100, you know, MFI. I mean, that slightly below market rate is really what we're trying to get to. And they're going to be able to deliver on that, is what it sounds like. Just maybe not quite as far below as, you know, we're hoping for, depending on, you know, what funding comes through. But I concur with Justin that, you know, we probably should avoid this in our conditions. I wanted to return really quick to the 43 spaces requirement in the TDM. And I have a question for Justin. Justin, if we were to condition a TDM program that required a floor of 43 offsite parking spaces available to tenants of this building, first off, what would it take to reduce that in the future if they did research, they follow the rest of the condition, which says, you know, that there's monitoring, there's performance benchmarks, they get to a point where, you know, I don't care what 3 years. 3 years is just their option to renew those parking spaces. But we're looking at a condition of approval that lives for how long? It's really the lifespan of the permit. And so they need, you know, this does not allow for a reduction of spaces in the future. And that's why I called this out, is because we're setting a floor at 43 spaces, and they would have to come back and do a full land use review, you know, modification, I believe, of this approval in order to reduce that. We could just program that into this as an administrative level concern, that if they're hitting benchmarks and they have the data to support it, that they can make adjustments as needed to continue hitting those benchmarks. Justin, do you agree with my assessment about the lifespan of a condition of approval that is this specific?
Yes, I do generally. I will tell you that staff back channel here, I guess that's the beauty. And when we're in person, we lean over and talk to each other. Here, we message back and forth through various platforms. We're trying to work up some sort of condition language that speaks to the 43, which is what they have proposed in order to get the modification that they've applied for. We have looked, I'm trying to toggle between screens. We've looked at adding some potential language to that condition that provides for any future modifications or changes to the TDM program, which includes the 43 spaces, would require an approval of a new parking modification application that they would need to file. I don't know if that answers your question, but as you went through your question, those were the issues that we've kind of been discussing back channel.
So would it be better to set it at 43 and say that that's an initial floor, subject to, you know, compliance with, you know, subject to hitting compliance with the performance benchmarks as part of the program? Or do we just leave it at 43 and require parking modification in the future? And then I have another follow-up question to this.
I think I'm probably most comfortable with adding the 43. I mean, we've had discussions back channel about, oh, well, do we even need the 43? In other contexts, if somebody were applying for some sort of variance or some sort of other aspect, and there was a numerical calculation that they were looking at, and because all of our parking, you know, the charts we look at, they're all numerical formulas. I think it's appropriate to include a numerical floor to start off with, because that's what the standard they need to meet in order to meet the condition. But that moving forward, if they should find conditions substantially change, say of those 43 spaces, 12 of them are being used over a period of years or a period of monitoring requirements, I think they could submit realistically a parking modification application with a realistic expectation that it would be approved based on new data that they have. And I think that is enhanced by the fact that this is a transit-oriented development. I would be much more. Okay. I would be much more suspicious of a development that wasn't transit-oriented working in this framework. But given the proximity to downtown and to all of our mass transit, I think it makes sense to look at it that way.
Okay, so I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with leaving 43 as the floor, but I do have one more follow-up question, which is, say that the city code changed, in the next, few years to require, say, 0 parking spaces, or just reduce the parking requirement for buildings downtown. How does this condition hold up in that kind of situation where the regulatory environment changes and they may no longer need to provide those under code, or at least that same quantity? Would they still have to get a parking modification to comply with the new code, or
that's a good question, Joseph, and I don't know that I have a perfect answer to it. The code that applies to the application is the code in place at the time the application's filed, right? So if the code changes in the future, that doesn't necessarily change the review criteria that the application was approved under. And I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know how a future parking modification would sit in that framework. Like, would they be allowed to apply for a parking modification under the new code, even though they had this condition of approval that required them to do certain things under the code under which the development was approved? And so I'm not sure I have an answer to that question. I think I might have to research that a little bit to figure out exactly whether or not our code would allow them to go backwards in time and undo a condition of approval based on a new code requirement. And I'm trying, as I sit here on the fly, trying to think of other contexts, because sometimes it always helps me to put it into a different context. If somebody were applying to build a house in the floodplain and they were required to build a house to a certain level, if the code changed, would they then be required to enhance that? I don't think that they would. Certainly if they did a major modification to that house, they would be subject to the new code, right? So they would have to build it up. So again, this is on the fly, trying to think of different situations to take it out of the parking context. But it is a true statement that the code that applies to their application and the criteria we're using are all the ones that were in place at the time the application was filed. Undoing that could be problematic.
I would personally feel more comfortable with setting an initial floor of 43 and allowing it to be dynamic, but I obviously will defer to my fellow commissioners about that. I just wanted everyone to kind of be aware of what it means to program this in with 43 into a condition of approval at a set number that does not reduce, it on its own. It doesn't allow them to adjust based on those performance benchmarks, without coming back and doing another review. So anyway, I just want to put that out there. I have a concern about that, but I'm happy to support approval of this with the drafted condition as distributed in the packet, if that's what the rest of the commission wants to support.
Commissioner Hemer?
I would like to discuss Amy Ertz's issue about the loading zone if we're done with the parking.
Before you get started on that, I actually have a really relevant question about that too, just to kind of set the stage for any discussion about this before we get started. Do they comply with the loading zone standards?
I was
as
going to,
proposed.
that was going to be, well, the loading and unloading includes off-site parking, right? Which they don't provide, which they have to provide some or per code, right?
Well, I mean, there's loading zone requirements that are distinct from parking requirements. And so I'm curious, before we discuss whether or not they're providing enough loading zones, do they comply with the standard?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm looking at the loading zone section of the code, which is 608, 19.608. And for residential buildings, with fewer than 50 dwelling units, no loading space is required. For all other buildings, one loading space is required. So for residential buildings, so they are required one loading space, which they are providing.
Which they are providing. Yes. So they comply with the standard. Okay. Thank
you. So how many? What is the standard for off-street parking? Right, they're not providing any off-streat parking, but isn't there a standard for some sort of off-street parking?
Well, there is a requirement for off-street parking, and that's why they've submitted the parking modification to provide their parking off-site. But yes, there is an off-street parking requirement.
When I think, I want to make sure I'm not confused. When I think of off-street parking, I think of parking spots in between by the road, next to the sidewalk, to the building. Not on-site, which would be, a parking lot, but off-site, which would mean parking on the street, right? Provide parking on. Am I thinking of that incorrectly?
Yeah, the street parking is not part of the parking requirements. The parking chapter is all about off-street parking or on-site parking. That's what the 55 units are supposed to be providing with the reductions, 39 parking spaces.
So there's no requirement to have parking on the street in front of your building or anything like that?
No, okay. That would be developed as part of, if there were required, the frontage improvements. But that's already a developed street. So there isn't any on-street parking to be created as part of the project. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Well then, sorry, Amy.
How is accessible parking provided?
ADA parking.
Did someone respond? Did I hear that?
I think you cut out kind of halfway through your sentence.
How is ADA parking requirements being met? Did I cut out, or is this silence?
I think the question is posed to Vera.
That time it was silent.
I think she's looking.
Vera is looking. Hang tight. She's flipping through pages.
Well, they aren't providing any parking on site. So an accessible parking is typically it's a proportion of, and I'm not suggesting I'm an expert on this, but it's a proportion of the number of parking spaces that you're providing on your site.
So which is required in order to meet building permit. Just curious how we're getting around accessible parking requirements.
Well, the problem is that if you don't require any parking on site, then you don't have to require any ADA parking.
Right.
So their lot, across the street probably doesn't require any ADA parking either, since it's a standalone parking lot and not tied to any building, which I think is against the rules of the DMU. So, but I won't argue that here.
Can we condition that they designate a certain number of spots in that lot as accessible? Can we condition that?
My logical gut reasoning would be probably not. Because nobody owns that. You can't condition a third party.
But they're going into an agreement with that party. So wouldn't we be able to make that between, not with the third party, but couldn't the city have that agreement with, like, say, it doesn't matter how you guys do it, you need to provide X amount of accessible parking spots. And then they would have to work that out with whoever they're leasing the spaces from. Right? Would that work?
I believe the problem we're running into with that, Commissioner Karashabadi, is that the ADA accessible parking is not accessing the site that the building's on, right? And so you'd be providing an ADA accessible parking space, an 8-minute walk or however far it is from the actual site the building is. The ADA requirements are designed for on-site parking and parking requirements that would be accessible to somebody accessing a building. Here, I don't think it's applicable. And I think there's also problems with, as Commissioner Hemer pointed out, they don't have control over this other than as a leasehold interest. And so, you know, they might not be able to get that agreement out of the folks that they're leasing the parking spaces for.
Thank you.
I see this as a real weakness of the parking requirements, reduction of parking requirements. This is a serious equity issue, I think. And, you know, obviously there are reasons why ADA parking requirements are held. And I would argue that ADA parking spaces held an 11-minute walk away is not accessible. That's not meeting the point.
Isn't there the parking?
You don't have one across the street?
Right, that's what I was just saying.
That's still not accessible, right? Not by the letter of code.
Okay, so if there is not on-site parking, then that's one challenge. However, ADA parking is still needed, even if it's across the street, it's still needed as far as just physically getting somebody in and out that has a wheelchair. You need those wider spaces. So if I'm transporting, or if someone is getting in and outside of a vehicle, they can still roll, or, you know, still take themselves across the street to the building. So just having that ADA space, I mean, I don't think this building or this project shouldn't exist if they're not providing ADA parking on site. That's just, I think that ties into my point with having more load and unload zones. I think that we need to examine the code. I don't know when we can flag this, but for all apartment complexes, even under 50 units, there should still be load and unload zones. People have to move in and out. People have visitors that have ADA challenges, accessibility challenges, and more as people move away from individually owned cars and more shared ride options or shared ownership in cars and autonomous driving, we will need more load and unload spots. So like for a building for 55 units, we should probably realistically have 3 or 4 load and unload spots, and 3 of those should be for cars, and 1 of them should be at least large enough to accommodate a large moving van. Like that's the realistic.
That's conversation is certainly pertinent to another time in our meeting together. Commissioner Sherman, did you want to chime in on this piece?
Yeah, just looking at some aerials, there is some adjacent on-street parking kind of directly in front of the next parcel over that I imagine the city could make a determination it could allocate as ADA accessible parking if that was what the city so chose to do. So I want to just point that out. And also, I think if some of these kind of shared parking agreements, potentially create some challenges there, I'd feel comfortable eliminating the parking requirement altogether.
Okay. I think that we have heard from most everybody. I will share my perspective. I too am challenged by this application relative to parking. I think there are some real holes here. I have concern about obviously the ADA parking is a piece of that. I think putting the parking into these two lots that we essentially don't control, there's nothing relative to how that lot is designed, what it may or may not have relevant to the different types of parking spaces. It's out of our jurisdiction, in other words, and within 3 years or less than 3 years or tomorrow, it could be developed, and we would just have nothing to say for that. I have concerns about other pieces of the application in terms of the design review. Looking at the adjacent developments, whether from Coho or from Axletree, the level of kind of the attention to the design and development of this particular project doesn't strike me as in the same vein as taking those criteria seriously. I question that. If you look at those three buildings and their applications across the board, this looks like it was designed under a whole nother set of criteria. And there's lots there, but I think in my position and where I'm at, I have concern enough about this parking to consider not voting in approval. However, I am hearing from the rest of this group a potential majority to vote in approval, and I want to put that forward and allow folks to talk it through, and also make sure that we're all on the same page relevant to any amendments that we're making. Vice Chair Edge?
Could I request a straw poll from the commission for who would approve the way that it is written, the way it was distributed in the packet, the findings and conditions of approval?
Yes, so that would be with the 43 who would approve. Just raise your hands. Got 4, 5.
We still.
Well, I'm prepared to make a motion.
But can we approve, or can we have a motion without figuring out the accessibility part, the parking, for the wheelchair accessibility?
Okay, so these are things that we can absolutely discuss further if there's specific conditions. I don't know that I'm comfortable endorsing a condition relating to ADA. I think the suggestion that the street park, the city could designate nearby street parking, on-street parking as ADA spaces for if there are residents here that require that kind of access. I think that that's something that the city is able to work out administratively. I don't believe that we need to condition that as part of this applicant's permit. I'm just hesitant about conditioning things that may or may not be required that could create serious obstacles to the project moving forward. Absolutely. And so that's where I am with the ADA requirement. That's where I am with kind of the other things that we've been kind of batting around as potential conditions. The condition that I was interested in amending was to make it a little bit more flexible so that, they're not held to the same 2022 standard in 2032. It seems like everyone else is on board with requiring the floor as part of the condition, including city attorney. So I'm willing to defer on that. But I think that I'm just really happy with the way, with that exception, I'm really happy with the way that the conditions are already drafted. And I would just be really hesitant about really adding to that.
Vice Chair Edge, can I just pick at that a little bit? Wouldn't you agree that we're already being extremely flexible in our view of this criteria? Enough so to say that at a minimum, accessible parking requirements should be met, or that they should be designated within these lots. Like I said, could be an application.
My challenge is that, well, in principle, yes, I want there to be accessible spaces. My challenge is that these are off-site parking lots, and and that they may or may not, be able to drive they may not be able to choose, it may not be their choice, what spaces are made available to them as part of that agreement. And so since it's really outside of their power, it's just, I don't know. I have an inherent discomfort with that.
Others?
I don't want it to get overlooked. The accessibility, I don't want to just say, well, city council will figure it out, and then approve this thing without, having something at least that everyone's clear on. That's what's going to be done. I'm not saying that's the conditions, but
yeah, Vera, if there's if there's a modification to a parking lot, which obviously somebody's going to have to go do, right? Is that a permit thing, and does it require ADA parking or anything like that? Or Steve, do you know that?
I might defer to Steve on that. The building official is who would weigh in on that. Not sure. I don't know that answer.
Well, you can't just go in and create a parking lot without a permit.
No. Of course not. No, and if they're going to be adding parking spaces, yes. I'm just not sure where the ADA proportion kicks in. I just don't know for sure.
Is Steve still there?
I think he is.
He's probably sleeping. All right. Because maybe that would help answer our question, I guess.
I think so. Yeah, certainly help.
It seems to me that the ADA requirement applies to the owner of the parking lot. So here, these folks are leasing parking lot space from an entity or a person or a business or whatnot. They own the parking lot. So the ADA requirements, I believe, would apply to that parking lot, and the accessibility they would be talking about would be accessing what you're asking, or accessing the building where the parking lot is, right? Or what you're providing. Because if you're a parking lot out in the middle of nowhere, I guess I'm having trouble finding an avenue to require this development, which is not building any parking, to comply with the ADA. There's been some discussion about drop-off points, things like that. The city providing nearby ADA compliant parking, in an urban downtown setting. That's typically where the ADA parking is. It's on the street, right? People will still be able to park on the street downtown near this building in an ADA compliant parking. I think that the intent behind this building is that many of these folks are purchasing units or renting units because of the transit-oriented nature of the development. They may also own cars, but they might park those cars off-site somewhere and not use them all week while they take the train into Portland to work. I think that's the idea. I am not, and again, this has not been raised as any sort of approval criteria or anything that we can impose upon these folks. So I don't really know the avenue to actually impose it. Those are kind of my thoughts in listening to some of the discussion.
I know that projects and applications don't set precedent, which we judge other projects, but certainly they do in our mind, right? That we're just setting ourselves up without a clear standard or understanding of how we approach these situations. And I would say we're kind of looking at the extreme edge of kind of the how we address the parking scenario without very clear structure of how it's regulated. These alternative approaches. So I'm foreseeing future challenges.
I don't know if this addresses what you just said, Chair, but I'm not aware of an ADA requirement being imposed on a project that's not constructing parking. Is there an avenue there for somebody who wants ADA access to this building to challenge that? Perhaps, but I don't think that occurs within the land use proceeding. Elevators
are an ADA compliant deal. The width of your stairs are an ADA compliant deal. There's a lot of things that are ADA compliant that goes into a single building.
I was talking about parking.
Right. Parking is different. You can still live and, need elevators and wider spaces and not have a car. That doesn't.
No. I understand that. I was just trying to make the point that it is there's not uncommon.
Sure. I would just, again, lean towards we need to look at the code in the future for how many load and unload zones there are. And then, fall back on the future as far as people being able to get in and out of the building in that way. But
how big is? Sorry.
Go ahead.
How big is the loading zone that they have currently? Like, is there enough space in front of that building to have at least one accessible parking spot in the front of the building?
I think Vera's looking for it, but I think when I scanned, I think it has to be at least 35 feet long, the loading zone, and it has a width requirement. I
know ideally buildings like this would have at least 1 or 2 ADA spots and then 2 or 3 load unload zones for autonomous vehicles in the future and ride shares, and then a load for a moving truck.
Okay.
Chair,
I'm just gonna just wait till you're picked on, I suppose, and then we can, just to keep us in line here. Commissioner Sherman?
I was just going to suggest that I feel like you've kind of pulled at an interesting thread that I don't know if we're going to necessarily resolve here tonight, and it might make sense to continue the hearing so that this can be looked into a little bit more closely, because it does seem like we are still requiring the building to have parking. We are just allowing that parking to be moved to another location. And so then there becomes those questions of, are those other locations provisioning ADA accessible parking? Like, that's, I think, at the heart of the question. And I don't know if we're going to be able to answer that tonight. So I just wanted to maybe float that idea, and if someone else wants to make the motion, they can go ahead.
Yeah, and I just
the key is that
Vice Chair Edge, just really quick.
Parking.
But
so just hold on.
The key is they're not. I'm sorry, you.
Right, everybody go on mute just for a moment. Vera or Laura or Justin, if someone can get a hold of Steve, I'd love to hear from him right now. It seems really relevant. All right, and like the wizard from behind the curtain, he appears. Steve, you're a very popular guy right now. We have questions about parking.
Yes, I've been here and I've been following them, and I've been going back door to Vera and Justin to sharing my opinions, and some of them have been shared with you. But I don't know of any requirement for a building that is not installing parking to require them. At the same time, they are negotiating with the property across the street to construct 17 new parking stalls that are not there already, I don't see a reason why they couldn't negotiate with the owner to make one or two of those stalls ADA. In the future, if they don't need those 23 stalls, I might need Justin to help me out here. I don't think they're required to keep them as ADA, but the owner across the street must have some surplus parking. Otherwise, they wouldn't be offering up their land, because there's 6 of the existing stalls are being offered and 17 new ones that they're going to construct. I would think that with there's a curb extension, there's a crosswalk, there's ramps easily between that parking area and right there on 23rd. I don't see it as being a huge issue. I don't know if we can at this time bring the applicant back in to make an answer to prevent continuance to the next time, but if that's an option, we may consider it.
I think that's a good option we've taken before. Vera, you've had your hand up for like ever. Do you have something you want to add to this?
Thank you. If I may, it's kind of coming back to the condition and the floor of the 43 spaces. I just wanted to point out that the 43 spaces is what the applicant has proposed, which is over the minimum required number of off-street spaces that they would have required, right? In the DMU, you can have up to a 70%, or up to a 0.7 ratio for parking, which would actually be 38 spaces for them. So I just wanted to point that out as a mathematical number, that 43 is what the applicant has proposed for their off-site spaces, but that's a 0.78 parking ratio. That if that number is something to think about, it's 43 is what they proposed, but the minimum that they're actually required would have been 38 spaces. So I'm not trying to confuse this topic even more, but if the floor is something that people wanted to talk about, there could be a different floor for that number within that condition. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Vera. Vice Chair Edge.
So how many ADA spaces would be required to be built to meet the minimum 38? How many of those would be required to be ADA?
I'm not super familiar with private parking, but if it was public right-of-way parking, they would need to build 2.
And then if we're talking about only 17 new spaces being constructed across the street, is that the right number?
17 new ones, and they're going to lease 6 existing. Yes.
So if maybe what we're concerned about is the delta, it's the change, what's being constructed new, then of those 17, how many would be required to be ADA?
1.
I might be okay with that as a condition in the kind of where we're defining the TDM, and we're saying that, there's this much parking that's required, as part of the TDM. Given that there's 17 new spaces being constructed, that I think it's reasonable to ask for one of those to be ADA. But I'm just trying to kind of float a compromise position here. My preference would be to leave it alone. But since there's some interest in this, I'm just kind of seeing if we can find something we can agree on. So what do we think about
that? Commissioner Massey?
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting discussion. I think that my suggestion would be that we back out of the weeds of whether it's 1 or 2. And if we do condition it along the lines of those spaces just need to comply with the ADA, law, and they can figure it out. I mean, I feel comfortable that they will do the right thing as long as we have a caveat in there that says that those spaces should comply with the ADA requirements. If that's a compromise, because I get a little bit worried about saying 1, 2 spaces, 2 over here, 3 at the Elks Lodge and all that other kind of stuff. They will come up with the right answer.
Commissioner Sherman.
I think I agree with I think most of what Commissioner Massey was saying, except thinking about ADA accessibility. If those two spots were up at Oddfellows, some 10 blocks away, that doesn't feel as compliant as kitty corner across the street. So I don't know how others might feel about that, but that's just kind of building off of that idea.
Agreed. Proximity is important.
Yeah, that's why I was focused on the 17 new ones. It feels like we have a bit more defensibility in terms of, they're new, they're being built. It's a change. And so we can affect, some requirements against that change. If the requirement is 1, then it's 1 and that's fine. But it's there and not across the street. It's not a half mile away. It's in that one spot across the street. And so I guess if we wanted to just add that to condition 3, which is the TDM condition where they're talking about the provision of off-site parking. I'd be comfortable with what Vera said and revising that down to 38 spaces, which is the minimum required number of parking spaces. If were they to provide them on site, that would be the standard. Be fine with just saying that the floor is the standard. But adding a sentence to say for the newly constructed parking spaces to comply with the ADA requirements.
Commissioner Sherman?
Joseph, I don't know if it should be the newly constructed ones, right? Because then if the requirement is if it's 38 and 38 means you need 2 ADA spots, but you have to build 17 new spots and 17 means you only have to have 1 ADA spot. It feels like we're doing some slippery math there. I think the requirement should be based off of whatever the number is that we are establishing. And then those ADA spot or spots should be as close to the building as possible. That's kind of my perspective.
I'm in agreement with that.
It feels challenging to me to, if we tether it to the new 17 spaces, then one of those 17 spaces has to be the ADA space. If we say, hey, you just need to provide, 2 or 3 or whatever it is, then they could put them at Oddfellows.
Right,
you know what I mean?
May already have ADA spaces in that lot. Is it only the 17 that are being used in that lot? Also, Jennifer has her hand up in the attendees.
There were 6 existing spots that were going to be leased, and then 17 new spots that were going to be constructed. And a lot of times we focus our requirements, on what's changing, what's being built new. And so that's where I see the opportunity here is kind of being more legally defensible and also being able to specifying the location where those need to go. I feel more comfortable with that, but maybe that doesn't matter, and Justin wants to weigh in and say that I'm being too pedantic.
I did look on Google Maps on the lot across the street, and on Google Maps I did not notice any existing ADA places. The building's old enough; it probably predates the ADA requirement.
Right. So, Laura, I'm kind of looking at you now. We have before brought back the applicant just to ask and clarify as we're kind of making updates. Are you in favor of bringing forward?
I guess that's a question for Justin of whether or not we would have to reopen the hearing or no.
Well, it depends. I mean, are you proposing to ask the applicant a clarifying question on their application? Are you willing to provide ADA spots? You're clarifying some of their application materials. If you want them to testify and add material to the record, then we would need to reopen the record.
I don't really know if it is a clarifying question, really. I mean, what the response that we're going to get is yes or no. And a no answer is potentially going to impact a vote It's not like a clarifying question of something we're confused about or asking for further detail on. So I'm not actually sure it's.
Are you receptive to a condition? Basically, I think is more.
But like, does it matter whether they're receptive, right? It's not, we're not like, oh, you're not receptive. Okay, then we won't do that. That's just not, it's more so, what does this commission feel is necessary?
Well, again, I think we're struggling here because if we were all in person, what would likely happen is a planner would be talking to somebody on the applicant team and they would be hashing out some sort of condition that worked. We'd be saying, hey, are you okay with this condition or whatever? So there would be a little bit of back and forth. That frequently happens while you're in deliberations. So I kind of view it as more of a clarifying question as to whether or not they're open to entertaining that as a condition. And we can work out the language for that condition as we've discussed already in this deliberation. Being on Zoom, it's a little bit more difficult because they're in a waiting room. We don't have that leeway to kind of look at something like that.
Okay, so
do Chair, do we want to perhaps recess for 5 minutes and give staff the opportunity to have a conversation with the applicant and then come back and staff can propose language for a condition?
I love that idea. Best idea all night. Good job. Who wants a recess? I see no one. Oh, Laura's raising her.
Can you just give us a second to talk about that just for a second offline? I'm just going to mute us because we have to figure out the logistics of how to talk to Jennifer because she's on the Zoom. And so we can't just bring her back onto the Zoom and everybody else turns off their camera. Like we need to have a logistical conversation for a second.
Okay. We'll pause.
So Jennifer, if you're listening, we're going to try to email you and make sure that you are monitoring your email. Good times with Zoom, everybody. Good times.
With new territory.
So we're going to take a recess for 5 minutes.
We are?
Yes, we're going to take a recess for 5 minutes.
So at
9 to take a recess for 5 minutes.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we'll meet back here at 9:31.
Okay, we are back on the air.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So we're back. Vera or staff, is there an update?
Yes, there are two updates. First, on the loading and unloading business, there is an additional loading unloading space that can be created on the street, just, I guess it's sort of east-ish of this property. There are on-street parking spaces in front of the adjacent property that can be converted to loading and unloading spaces as well. They have a parking lot on their site for the dental office. So we can create an additional loading and unloading space just adjacent to this property. So I know there were some questions about that. So there is an additional space that's available on street.
Do we condition that, or how does that work?
I mean, that's a city function that we would do that. So we can take care of that. And as far as the parking spaces across the street, so what the applicant said was that they are certainly fine with creating, 2 ADA spaces across the street. We should note that ADA spaces are larger than traditional spaces, so that could reduce the number of spaces overall that get created as part of that, and that they are certainly fully supportive of that. They don't think there would be an issue with it, but they can't guarantee that the property owner would agree to those ADA spaces. They are certainly are, but they haven't spoken with them because this all came up tonight, of course. And so I think that they could, I guess, potentially, lose some revenue because that could reduce the number of spaces that are leased for them. So they can't speak for that property owner. They are supportive of it, but they can't guarantee that the property owner would agree to it. So I think a condition is uncomfortable for them because they don't know what the property owner will agree to. But they certainly support it. But
thank you, Vera. Okay, Commissioner Cox for body, and then I think we should go to a vote.
Just real quick, since there's that extra loading zone, can we use that as the loading zone and then use the one that's directly in front of the property as the 2 ADA spaces since it's 35 feet?
Would be my preference.
And then you don't have to worry about the 17 across the street, none of that. Then you're guaranteed that there's going to be at least 2 ADA spaces.
Vera, do we know that there's spaces right in front of this building? Because existing right now is a curb and a travel lane. The only 2 parking spaces are east of them just by 23rd. So I don't know of any on-site parking adjacent to this building, or on-street parking, adjacent to this building.
Yeah, sorry about that. The applicant mentioned that they thought there was a loading space that they had in front of their building, but that might not be correct.
Just my only chime in is that when people are moving and loading and unloading, especially furniture, to move in and out of the building, it is beneficial to have that space kind of as close to the building as possible so that people aren't carrying furniture across the street or too far from the main entrance.
Yeah, I'm looking at their site plan. I don't see anything outside of the building to the north. And Barry, you're saying east, and maybe I don't understand what you mean.
Sorry, just up the street, the dentist's office. That's just. Oh, I guess it is north. Sorry, but yeah.
Okay.
And I think there are two spots directly to the east on the south side of Washington Street, and then there I think is also another one, maybe 2 spots on the north side of Washington Street, also directly adjacent on the east.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, okay. So,
I have a follow-up question for, I think, probably Steve, maybe Vera. Just one more question about the parking and the ADA. So when someone comes in with a building or whatever permit to applying for a permit for building those 17 new parking spaces, will they not be required to comply with ADA for those new spaces, or is that judged from a site? I mean, how is that requirement applied there?
That's a really good question, because they're not adding the spaces for their building use. So typically ADA is tied to the occupancy of their own building. I personally have never had a place build parking spots for an adjacent business, so I do not know how that code is applied. Justin, any ideas?
Could you repeat that? You broke up on my screen.
For me? Okay. So what Joseph was asking was, if they build the 17 new spaces across the street, are they required to meet current code of number of ADA spaces? I do not know that, because I've never had a site build spaces for another applicant, not their own. And this building's old enough that it's obviously grandfathered in. I did do a Google Street View on it, and actually I did notice one spot right to the east or north of that building that is an ADA spot that they do have pre-existing on it. So they do have one. It's not obvious on the aerial. But do you know if they build 17 spots, if they're required by law to make a certain percentage ADA or not?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to research it. It partially depends on how they come forward with the application. What type of approvals are needed for building those particular lots. I just don't know enough detail to opine on that in the moment.
Okay, Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losville. I think as the conversation is just kind of continuing, I think I appreciate kind of the creativity and how we're like really trying to thread the needle here. And yet I think the more we're talking about it, like the harder it feels like it is. And I think there's a part of me, I would rather we continue the hearing so we can try and get some of this figured out in the interim. I'd rather we say no outright, or I'd rather we say, like, let's get rid of the parking requirements entirely, thereby actually removing, some of the issues that, again, we're trying to thread the needle on the fly here. And it just feels problematic, as my own personal opinion.
I agree. I'm not really comfortable with where we're at, that we have enough information, that staff have full understanding of how this would flesh out, or where we are legally with this. There's enough questions here that I don't think we have answers to, that I'm concerned about. How are others feeling relevant to this question? Is it, are you feeling a continuance, or are you feeling as though you're ready to make a vote? Commissioner Khosrowbadi?
I'm ready to approve.
I definitely don't want to kill this over the 88 parking spots. I just think it's too important of a development to just say, okay, since we can't figure this out. At the very least, I would say we continue it, if not approve it. I just don't. My only issue about approving it is potentially overlooking the accessible parking. That's. I just don't want to overlook that. But at the very least, I would say we continue it to get more information. But I definitely don't want to vote no at this point.
Well, Commissioner Khosrowbadi, how would you feel about adding the ADA requirement to the conditions of approval?
Yeah, that sounded great until they weren't able to, and I understand this part. They said they couldn't guarantee that the lot owner would agree to that.
But, other aspects of the lot are also not guaranteed, like whether it will be there next year and whether it will be developed, et cetera. So
yeah, that's a good point. But I mean, they are building 17 new spaces, right? So that's going to be there, correct? So it's a matter of,
we don't know how long though. That's what I guess I'm saying.
I'm good with approval on the criteria and the suggestion or what you were saying.
Okay, the amendment just to include the accessibility piece.
Somewhere to make the best efforts to, if they're going to do off-site parking like this, that they're making their best effort to somewhere locate as closest to the building as you can those two spots that would have been required I thought it was 36 spaces, but now I've heard 38 at the minimum, whatever would have been required if the parking lot was on site that they
Commissioner Massey, I'm going to ask you how you're feeling because you were a yes vote earlier. Are you?
Yeah, I remain in the same category with the caveat that that the developer comply with the ADA rules, and I feel like they understand our intent and they would understand the law and they would make the appropriate decisions with the parking lot holders and that kind of thing. Despite Commissioner Hammer shaking his head, that's what I think.
I'm going to check on you next, Commissioner Hammer. Are you still in a no position?
I'm still a no vote, and I don't think that you should ever condition something for a third party. I think that is bad policy.
Can I make two comments?
Yes, Justin.
Commissioner Ert said she would like to see the applicant use their best efforts to do something, and Commissioner Massey said he would like them to comply with the ADA. Two problems with those statements in that if you ask that they do their best efforts could end up them not being able to negotiate with this property owner to build.
Correct.
And with regards to Commissioner Massey's statement, I think I understood your intent. This isn't a criticism. I'm just asking for some clarification on that, because if the ADA legally does not apply to them, and you're saying they need to comply with the ADA, there's kind of I can't think of the right word. Boy, I can't think of a good metaphor, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, if they're asked, if the condition is comply with the ADA, and we look into it further and figure out that there aren't any ADA requirements for a residential housing unit that's not providing on-site parking, is that meet what you're asking or what you're comfortable with? I think you understand the gist of those two comments.
Yeah, I understand this, and this question gets more and more complicated, I think, the more we talk about it. So I think that you raise an interesting point. I guess my point would be if you give them, sort of a general direction to comply with the ADA, and they can't comply with it, then they haven't. They can't fulfill the approval terms and conditions, and they'd have to come back to us.
I get, but that begs the question: what does comply with the ADA mean?
Well, that's the first part of your comment, and I don't have an answer for that.
Right.
Because the more we talk about this, the further down this rabbit hole we seem to go.
As I sit here, I don't know. This is a super unique situation that just has come up this evening. I think staff process, I don't want to speak for them, under the idea that they weren't providing parking, on-site parking, so they wouldn't build ADA parking spaces. We've now unearthed a new issue that we perhaps need to ferret out a little bit before we come to determination, which may lean towards Commissioner Sherman's suggestion that we continue to work out some of these details. But
I would not object. I would not object to a continuance. I understand that. I think everyone has the same intent in this body. I'm all hearing the same sort of general intent about what we're trying to achieve. I guess, if it comes back, the answer might be we don't have to do it. And so then is commission going to be satisfied with that answer? So be careful what you ask for.
All right, Commissioner Kotrabati.
Sorry, not to beat a dead horse, because I know we are. But could we just say in the condition, if it's required, then you have to do it. If it's not required, then don't worry about it. We can either do that, or can we have a continuance, find out the answer to that question, and then come back and say, okay, it's not required, then let's approve it or deny it based on whatever each individual.
I think that would be the path of the review that would have to go through with any new parking lot. That if it were required, that they would be required to uphold that code. And they certainly couldn't get around it. So I guess I don't see a reason to include that language, because as part of a review process for this newly developed parking, the city would have to review.
Right.
What I just don't get is it's a third party. And so, what criteria are they reviewing against?
So I guess we need to find out if they even need to have it. I mean, I think that's because we're spinning our wheels if they don't.
Vice Chair Edge.
Thank you, Chair. So, what I'm asking myself, when we're talking about a continuance and getting this additional information, is this going to change my vote? Is this going to change my vote from a yes? Is this going to make me not support? No. I'm ready to approve this, and I think that whatever parking gets built, that's the only parking that we could require ADA compliance with. It's on a third-party site. I think it's a bad idea. I agree with Commissioner Hemer. It's a bad idea to start conditioning third parties. They're going to have to comply with whatever rules they have to comply with to build that new parking. And I'm pretty sure it's going to require an ADA spot. And so, and then the other thing is the applicant is fully aware of our concerns and the amount of time that we spent deliberating over this issue. I really don't think that they're going to walk away from this without a condition related to this and be like, "Whoa, I'm glad we dodged that bullet." I mean, I think that they recognize this as a concern. They have tenants that they're looking to support. I think that they have enough incentive to be aware of the ADA issue and to look for solutions for their tenants that need this kind of access. And so I'm prepared, again, to approve this with the findings and conditions of approval that were distributed with the packet tonight,
Okay.
right now, no contention.
Vera, last comment.
I'm sorry, I'm raising my hand. Thank you, Chair, for Steve Adams to chime in, because we've been emailing back and forth, and he has identified a couple of ADA spot possibilities, and I'd like him to chat about that with you all.
Okay. Briefly, Steve, we're coming across the time clock here. Critical time.
I see that. Didn't we have a goal of finishes before 10 a.m.?
Yeah, and if Greg wins on a bet, I'm done.
Okay, so along with the 2 spots in front of the dental office, which we're kind of identifying as a loading zone, there are 2 single spots on the other side of the street, one on either side of the ADA ramp. That's an extension out into the street. At this point, we could identify one or both of those as ADA parking, and they have the ADA ramp there, and it could just be public parking spaces on the other side of the street. I don't know how popular they are. I don't know how many high school kids will be forced to walk an extra couple hundred feet to get to school, but we do have 2 on-site street parking spaces on the other side of the street.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Now, Vice Chair Edge, please put us on a swan song. I would like to hear what you've got to say. I will entertain a motion.
I'm sorry. I will make a motion. I would like to make a motion. I mean, are we ready to approve this? I mean, I don't want this to die tonight. I'd rather continue it than let it die. So
I get a very strong sense. We are ready.
Okay. Then I move that we approve application VR-2021-017 with the findings and conditions of approval that were distributed in the meeting packet by staff.
There is a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand. One opposed. All right, the motion passes. Thank you, everybody. We've got a long way to go on our conversations with parking, and I think we're getting closer. Vice Chair Edge.
Chair, could I move to extend the meeting really quick so we can just have a little bit of a comfort zone to finish what we have on the agenda?
Let me look. We have other business and discussion items and forecast for the future. You don't think we can do that?
We've got an election.
Do we? I don't see that.
Planning Commission election 7.1. Remember, we're going to have a talk about who's going to be the chair and the vice chair.
I just want to make sure we have time for it.
Okay, I'll entertain another motion.
I move we extend the meeting to 10:15.
I'll second it proudly.
You would. Okay. All those in favor? Hi. Gosh. All right. All those opposed? I'm going to look for that in the meeting minutes that I opposed. Okay. Moving on. Let me finish my script. Hold on.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
If anyone wishes to appeal the decision of the City Council, you can complete an application stating grounds for your appeal within 15 days of mailing of notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. Other business. Planning Commission elections. Every year, the commission elects a chair and vice chair. I would like to open this to discussion. Anybody interested in chair or vice chair positions? Edge, Commissioner Edge.
Thank you, Chair. Did you want to do like a straw poll of people that were interested first, or did you just want to launch into some discussion? Because I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I was trying to encourage other people to step up. And I mean that in a very supportive way. Commissioner Khosrowbadi?
I'll step up for vice chair.
Okay. Others? Commissioner Massey, was that a hand? Or did you just, he's clapping.
I was applauding Adam.
I like that.
If I may, Chair Roosevelt, this is kind of my thing, and I think that it's important that each one of us take a chance to sit in the chair position, because I think it's really important for us as a group to kind of understand what that position is, and as we kind of work it all out together, we'll each have a different style and so on and so forth. And it's not that Chair Roosevelt has been doing a bad job. I just would like to support somebody that has not been chair. Volunteer themselves. It's not that much work. It's maybe an extra half hour every 2 weeks. You get to talk to Laura on the phone. It's kind of fun. And apparently you get a special script mailed to your house. So since you guys all like your packets getting mailed to you, you get extra stuff too. So
I feel like that was a backhanded compliment there.
So I hope that some of the people that have not been chair yet are willing to volunteer.
Okay, well, let's let them talk. Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld, who is still chair, Greg, or at least right now. I think in Greg's kind of spirit of service, I've also been thinking about how I might be able to better serve this commission in one of the officer roles, but don't necessarily have that thought out on what that could be. So I wanted to just put that out there.
I love it. Okay, Commissioner Edge.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with Commissioner Hemer. It's really in all of the committees and commissions that I serve on, and there are many. I encourage everybody to cycle through the different officer roles. It's really helpful to understand how the business works of running this show and what we're doing. And so it is healthy to have turnover for the officer positions. Now, with that said, I feel like it took us until about October for Chair Roosevelt and I to really hit our stride. And I feel like we're carrying some really good momentum. And I feel like she's in particular been doing a really good job. And I would support her, and I intend to nominate her for for chair for another year for this year, because I think she's done an excellent job, and I'd like to see her carry that momentum. Again, I think it really came together towards the end of the year, and I'd like to see you carry that through this year as well. And so I as well, I'm available and will make myself available to be the vice chair, again. I like working with Chair Roosevelt and the staff, and occasionally, wearing the chair hat. But I think turnover is important. And if there's someone that really has aspirations to be a future chair, then I think the vice chair is a good position for someone to take over, because I personally would not prefer to be the chair. And so if someone was interested in being chair and wants to get into that number 2 spot and see what it's all about and participate in those meetings with the chair and staff, planning our, ahead of time and everything. So it's good practice. It's a good experience. And so, as much as I would be honored to serve another year as your vice chair and serving under Chair Roosevelt for another year, I would open that up to someone who, wanted to be a future chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Appreciate that. Commissioner Massey?
Are you interested in being the chair again?
Yes, I would entertain that if you all would let me. I've enjoyed it, and I do feel kind of, Commissioner Edge, there's a learning curve, and I agree. Somewhere in fall, late summer, felt like we started to hit it. I actually feel like this whole commission kind of started to gel better. So, yep, I would. Yes, I would.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I think you've done a good job as well.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Kostrobati.
I'm sorry. I just need to ask this question. Has it been a year already?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's been a pandemic.
I know. I said it just, all 3 years are just gelling together. I would support you as chair again as well. And I would even support Commissioner Edge as vice chair too.
I concur. Commissioner Sherman?
Likewise, I'd be delighted to continue to support you as chair, as well as vice chair Edge. I would, I think, at some point be interested in rolling into one of those positions, especially given my kind of transportation and land use background. But I don't think that needs to happen at this moment. Okay.
I think we should begin with the vice chair.
I would like to make a motion to have Chair Roosevelt retain her chairpersonship. I guess is the right way to say it.
Are you speaking out of turn? Are you speaking out of turn? Did you raise your hand?
No, I'm nominating you and making a motion. I'm trying to get this meeting done.
Oh, God.
Let's go.
Okay, there's been a movement. Oh, there's been a second. All right. All in favor of Chair Roosevelt and her reign as chair for one more year. You're all approving to endure another year of pain. Okay.
I would also like to nominate Commissioner Vice Chair Edge to retain his position as well for 2022.
I second.
Okay. This is tough. Commissioner Hemer, you're forcing my hand here, and I wasn't quite ready to be forced. I was kind of enjoying this conversation about new folks moving into roles and kind of
You can always not accept a nomination if you don't want.
It's true. Okay. There's been a motion for Vice Chair Edge to continue for the next year, which means there's should be a second, and I thought I heard one.
I'd second.
Okay, so now there's a vote. Oh yeah, well, and in favor, okay, all right. I was going to follow the lead of everybody else on that one. Okay.
Right. Thanks, everyone. And, I'm happy to be, if someone is interested in transitioning into an officer role, next year, I'm happy to kind of be a liaison about that and, and talk with you and kind of do some coaching and, and help you be prepared for the transition. So feel free to reach out to me. I think you all know my personal email address. And so I'd be happy because again, like I said, I don't intend to be chair at any point. And so, for those of you that are, and again, I'm honored that you're supporting me again as the number 2 for this year. I will make myself available to help, mentor, whichever of you might be interested in transitioning to an officer role next year.
Yeah, I would agree. I would suggest that the 2 of us don't plan to make a three-peat on this, and that we do intentionally bring others into the role. Well, thanks everybody. I feel the love. I appreciate that. Commissioner Edge, I hope you're feeling the love. Thank you for the support from this group. And so I'm going to go into the script. So we're in other business. Commissioners and staff have other business. I have other business. Commissioner Heemer, you go first.
This actually covers 2 people for this. Here we go. Milwaukie Museum, along with our partner City of Milwaukie, Willamette Falls Studios, and the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, JAMO, are proud to present the first Letting Library lecture series this year entitled 80 Years from Incarceration, The Japanese American Story. Wednesday, February 2nd, beginning at 6 p.m. Join us for a commemoration of the 80th year anniversary of Japanese internment by discussing the before, during, and aftermath of internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Amy Mishima Peterson, a sensei, third-generation Japanese American, is a docent and speaker for JAMO. She will examine the overall history of Japanese Americans in our region, including the years of internment. Jacob Sherman, an avid historian and local researcher on Nikkei, will explore the Milwaukie Japanese American families and their influence on our city. Counselor Desi Nicodemus will give a special address as well. Due to COVID conditions, we will not have a live audience, but you can watch on Comcast Channel 30 or on the City of Milwaukie YouTube channel. Find it online the day of the event by visiting the city calendar at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. Along with the program, Letting Library will have a traveling trunk display from JAMO on site so you can learn more about the Japanese American history. And on February 15th, during the City Council meeting, there will be a proclamation honoring the Japanese American families as well. To learn more, check out the Milwaukie History Museum Facebook page or visit the Letting Library for more details.
Very nice.
Just wanted to say a quick thank you, Greg, for all your help kind of taking this little kernel of an idea and helping me turn it into reality. And on a more joking note, I really appreciate the avid local historian title you've now bestowed upon me.
Nice. Okay, great. That's awesome. Hey, I had one thought that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is whether or not, and I don't know that the Planning Commission has the authority, but whether or not we would consider including land acknowledgements at the beginning of our discussions and meetings. Land acknowledgements have been initiated by a number of institutions all around and public entities. As recognizing where our lands came from and the projects that are being impacted. So I just throw that out there as a thought. I think it's something that City Council should consider for future public meetings. Anybody have any reflection on that piece? Commissioner Sherman?
Thanks, Chair. I believe council might do land acknowledgements. I don't know if they do it for every meeting, but I know it is done. I also know sometime recently, I remember hearing Mayor Gamba talk about maybe trying to bolster and strengthen that land acknowledgement. I think there might have been another jurisdiction's acknowledgement that he had recently seen that he thought maybe was a little bit more detailed. So perhaps we could pull from there, and would also just kind of encourage us to think about how those acknowledgements are but a starting point for the work that we're trying to do. I think that's a really important kind of piece of the puzzle. But I support it.
Yeah, Commissioner Kashrabadi.
I just wanted to share my support for that, and I remember seeing a few city council meetings where they do that. I think I think it's the least we can do, right?
Yeah, and I think it's particularly pertinent as we are obviously discussing issues of land use. So it seems incredibly relevant. If council is already including this, I don't see any reason why we would not. So I would just ask staff to kind of look into that and get back to us. I think, and I would even spread that far and wide and say any commission or committee that's meeting as a part of this public entity should also include a land acknowledgement. Any other business? Any other business?
Just one little thing, if I can, Chair Lisfeld.
Yes.
Yes. So remember last time, such a long time ago now, we had that moment when we were thinking about coming back for meetings, that there might be a hybrid, we might be having some people come in, and we said we would talk about that at our next meeting. Well, this is our next meeting, but since that time, we've had the new variant that's come along, and so the meetings have kind of gone back to their original, just being done on Zoom, and we'll continue to do that for at least another month before we need to have the conversation again. That's what's happening with City Council. I think City Council members are not in the room, but they have opened it up to have one public testimony. We're not required to do that at this point. So I just wanted to kind of give you all a little update and let you know that we'll be continuing to have the conversation moving forward, and then we'll just have this conversation again. I just wanted to be sure that something was said about it because we said we would talk about it.
All right. Appreciate the update. Had assumed as much, but it's good to hear it from you directly. So continue the conversation then. I'm going to move on to future forecast. Laura?
Yes. Okay, great. So we are not meeting on February 8th. There's nothing on that agenda. And then for February 22nd, we're back up with Vera again, our esteemed colleague here. We've got two things that we want to talk to you all about. One of them came out of City Council, was looking at the income restricted housing code incentives. So actually pulling out all of our incentives that have anything to do with affordable housing and then putting them in their own section. So that is the topic of that work session. And then we also have a requirement through Oregon Senate Bill House 458 to look at how we're doing. Vera, what is the word I'm looking for?
It's expedited land division for middle housing. It's a state requirement that's associated with House Bill 2001.
Thank you. Those were the words that weren't coming up. So we will come and tell you the details about that and talk to you and get your thoughts on February 22nd about those two topics.
I feel like we should use the next 3 minutes since we have it. Adam? Really?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. The incentive one, the income restricted housing incentive, is that just about the current incentives, or is that discussing possible or potential new incentives?
Just the current incentives at this point.
All right, thank you.
Someday though, maybe. Someday though.
Okay, I will take a motion to adjourn from anyone.
So I move we adjourn.
Thank you. I've got a motion. Second. All in favor? Aye. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.